Towards a Muslim Society by Sayyid Qutb, translated by Al-Amrani. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Introduction. The call of Islam today is not merely a necessity for the Muslim world alone, it is a universal human need before it is a need for the Islamic homeland. Yes, the vast Islamic world, stretching from the shores of the Atlantic to the shores of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and penetrating deep into the heart of Europe, Africa and Asia, is in dire need of this call. Without it, it can have no true existence. Yet humanity as a whole today is no less in need of the guidance of Islam than is the Muslim world itself. And whether humanity perceives this truth or remains oblivious to it, it changes nothing of its reality. A sick man's need for medicine and treatment does not depend on his awareness of that need. Indeed, many times he refuses to take the remedy, recoils from the physician, and claims health and strength, even when he is in the utmost need of care and healing. John H. Denson, in his book Emotions as the Basis of Civilization, describes the state of the world before the advent of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him, saying, in the 5th and 6th centuries, the civilized world stood on the brink of chaos. The beliefs that had once upheld civilization had collapsed, and nothing of real substance had arisen to take their place. The great edifice of civilization, built over 4,000 years, seemed poised on the verge of disintegration and decay. Humanity was on the brink of returning to its former state of barbarism, tribes warring and battling one another without law or order. Even the institutions created by Christianity were fostering division and collapse rather than unity and harmony. Civilization, like a mighty tree whose shade stretched over the entire world, stood trembling, its very core rotting away. Amidst this overwhelming corruption, a man was born who would unite the entire world. Today, humanity is in no better a condition, though the causes may differ. Confusion, anxiety, alienation and turmoil weigh heavily upon the human conscience everywhere, whether in lands that once embraced divine faiths or in pagan societies. There is no longer any certainty, no firm foundation upon which the human conscience may find peace, tranquility and stability. No conviction remains steadfast, whether in faith, ideology, social order or political system. Europe and America cast aside all their ancient sanctities starting from the 16th century. They placed their faith in science, and this new Western deity reached the height of its sanctity in the 18th and 19th centuries. People assumed its principles were absolute, immune to doubt or contradiction. Yet as the 20th century dawned and unfolded, the very foundations of this deity began to tremble. It became clear that its principles were all subject to revision, and that it was itself undoing them day by day. This deity had begun with a particular conception of matter. It declared that nothing existed beyond material reality, that anything else was mere illusion, unworthy of consideration or inquiry. Yet, after breaking apart the atom with its own hands, it arrived at the realization that matter, as it had conceived it, did not truly exist. It found itself struggling to redefine it anew. Thus this deity wandered in confusion among its own creations, which themselves refuted its very assumptions. And so humanity lost its trust in this new God, a God who, in turn, had lost faith in itself, in its own methods, its own measures, and its own constructs. Having freed itself from the constraints of religious faith, humanity turned toward new forms of worship. America, for instance, discarded all the sanctities that had shaped human history and adopted 3 new deities: production, wealth, and pleasure. On the other side, Russia renounced belief in the one God and embraced the worship of matter, economics, and Karl Marx. Yet gradually humanity began to perceive that these gods too were leading the world into endless wars, oppressive colonization, and a descent into primal savagery. Psychological disorders, nervous ailments, individual and familial strife, and global unrest, these were the blessings bestowed upon their devout followers by these false deities. I do not know how people truly live behind the Iron Curtain in Soviet Russia. If life there were as idyllic as communist propaganda claims, then that Iron Curtain would not be necessary. The Soviet government would welcome visitors eager to witness its system firsthand, and it would allow its own people to observe other systems, confident that they would prefer their own and reject all others. But what I do know is how people live in America, the land of grand production, enormous wealth, and limitless pleasures. I have seen them there, ravaged by nervous anxiety, despite all their material abundance and conveniences. Their enjoyment is a frantic agitation, their happiness a mere animalistic exuberance. It seems as though they are constantly fleeing from some invisible spectres that haunt them. They are machines, moving in feverish haste, never pausing. Often I felt as though the people of America were trapped in an unceasing whirlwind, a relentless mill that never stops day or night. Grinding them down, and in turn they grind along with it. Never do they find a moment's rest, never do they feel at peace with themselves or with the world around them, if indeed they are even aware of their surroundings. There is no time for reflection, no space even to sense the mere experience of life itself as it rushes past them. Even in their moments of leisure, in parks, forests, along riverbanks and lake shores, they seem busy, occupied, as if in some urgent task, just as they are during their working hours. The only difference is that they are in a different place and engaged in a different activity. But there is no rest, no serenity, no contemplation, no inner peace. Yes, they produce in abundance, there is no doubt about that. Yes, they earn wealth in great quantities, this too is beyond question. But for whom do they produce? For whom do they amass wealth? For the sake of production itself. For the sake of wealth itself. The human element is absent. There is no awareness of the deeper motives and consequences of wealth and production, no sense of their meaning, with the keen perception of an awakened mind, with the sensitivity of a thoughtful heart, with the appreciation of a human soul distinct from that of a machine. None of this is visible in their faces, nor in their expressions. It is an endless mill, turning day and night, grinding, scattering what it grinds, only to gather it once more and grind it anew. People, objects, time, space, everything revolves in this perpetual motion that never tires, never ceases, never pauses for a single moment. It is vertigo, a ceaseless spinning, an unrelenting whirlwind, the tranquility of the heart, the serenity of the soul, the ease of conscience, the vigilant joy of reaping the fruits of toil and contentment, the sweet bonds of affection among people, the spiritual harmony between friends, the concerns born out of deep familial ties, those emotions that make an individual feel that he is not alone, that grant him confidence, reassurance, and relief after toil and hardship. The conviction in a power greater than the power of the earth, that conviction which makes the individual feel that he is not but a wandering speck in this vast universe, without origin or destiny. All of this has no place in the lexicon of American life, nor in the depths of the American soul. It is emptiness, emptiness despite the apparent bustle of life and its fullness. There is much merriment one who does not know might mistake it for happiness. Those ringing laughs in the air, those playful skirmishes that seek the points of pleasure in the body, those goblets that are never emptied of wine, that ceaseless noise that never quiets nor stills. But it is the merriment of the brute, not happiness nor true joy. Just as the revelry of the drunkard is not happiness, so too is this animalistic merriment not joy. It is merely the release of pent-up energy under the strain of exhausting labour. It is a rattling, like the clatter of machines venting steam. But where is man in all this clamour? Where is the human being, distinguished from the machine and the beast? And I cannot conceive that, behind the materialist philosophy in Russia, there lies anything but a life even lower than this one. For even that brutish gaiety, born of affluence and unrestrained indulgence in America, I cannot imagine it existing there. And in this abyss humanity now stands, whether in the East or the West, it is all the same. Humanity is in need of us. It is in need of a conviction that grants the conscience a refuge, in whose shade it may find relief from the scorching heat. That grants it peace from the ceaseless anxiety, and settles it in a haven of stability. This human conscience has grown weary from chasing after that fickle deity science that overturns its own scales at every moment, that renounces its own creations, and whose creations renounce it whenever a new discovery emerges. The intellect may have the capacity to pursue the footsteps of this ever-changing God, but the conscience is in need of constancy, of tranquility, of certainty. Humanity has grown weary of wallowing in the mire of indulgences, of worshipping matter and pleasure and production. Production should be the servant of humanity, not its master, and pleasure should belong to its possessor, not enslave and humiliate him. And faith in God is what grants man his freedom against the temptations of pleasure and against the tyranny of machines. And faith in God must at the same time not be a shackle for the mind, nor a prison for human nature, nor an obstacle to progress and growth in life. Thus Islam emerges, and the call of Islam stands distinct, and the world's dire need for us becomes evident in this very moment. The need of the individual conscience for solace, confidence and peace, the need of the human intellect for freedom, dynamism and vigour, the need of the family for protection, care and stability, the need of the human race for mutual understanding, cooperation and peace, the need of the individual for recognition of his existence, his attributes and his innate nature, the need of society for protection, balance and stability. The tree of human civilization trembles and sways today, just as it trembled and swayed before the birth of the man who unified the entire world. And how dire is humanity's need for the message of this man to save it once more. Humanity is in need of us. It is in need of our faith, in need of our principles, in need of our law, in need of our social system, a system that guarantees sufficiency for every individual, dignity for every human being, and peace for the conscience, the home and society alike, as well as international peace at large. And from this human necessity, alongside our faith in God, we derive our strength and our steadfastness in calling to the creed of Islam, its law and its unique social system. And we shall remain steadfast by the will of God, even if tyranny and oppression seek to snatch us from every direction. Humanity is in need of us, and thus the crime of those who attempt to dissolve us into any movement, organization or ideology, whether within the Islamic world or beyond, becomes all the more grave. Those who wish for us to dissolve into a nationalist movement, an international bloc, or a global trend, assuming such a global trend even exists, are committing a crime against all of humanity, even before they commit it against Islam or the Muslim world. Our mission is to stand distinct and to carry the torch for those lost in the valleys of the earth and the deserts of bewilderment. Our mission is to rescue humanity from the foul mire in which it wallows today, not to dissolve into it and vanish. And God is with us, and all of humanity shall one day come to know that the promise of God is true. Thus we have made you a justly balanced nation, so that you may be witnesses over mankind. Surah Al-Baqarah 143. The future belongs to Islam. When we speak of the Islamic social system, we do not speak of a historical system that once existed in the past and has now become a mere memory of history. Rather, we speak of a living system, and we contemplate its forms and structures as they may exist now or in the future. Likewise, we do not speak of this system as a local one confined within what is today called the Islamic world. Rather, we speak of it as a universal system towards which all of humanity may turn, for it is the only system capable of fulfilling the needs of mankind within broader horizons and for longer ages than any system known to humanity until this moment. The contemporary English philosopher Bertrand Russell says, "The age in which the white man ruled supreme has come to an end, and the perpetuation of that supremacy is not one of the laws of nature. I believe that the white man will never again enjoy days as pleasant as those he experienced over the past 4 centuries." And it is a true prophecy, in light of the realities unfolding before us today, in light of the historical experiences of civilizations past, and in light of the fundamental truths of human existence. The age of white man's supremacy has ended because his civilization has exhausted its purpose. It no longer has anything to offer humanity in terms of principles and ideas that might allow life to develop anew and evolve further. Every civilization endures only as long as it possesses a reservoir of insights into life, insights that enable life to expand, flourish, and ascend. The principles of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, were the last meaningful contribution of Western civilization. Since then, it has failed to produce anything of true value in the realm of ideals and ethics. The principles of the French Revolution played their role in the Western world and reached their intended objectives in their time. But those objectives were limited to a particular era and confined to specific meanings, and they no longer address the needs of humanity today. Even the very concepts that these words once embodied no longer correspond to the aspirations of mankind in the 20th century. The meaning of the word freedom in the French Revolution was personal freedom in every sphere of life. This concept catered to the needs of Europe at that time, for it liberated the individual from the domination of the church over his spiritual life, from the control of the nobility over his practical affairs, and from the authority of the state over his legal rights. Yet, little by little, this absolute freedom of individuals began to harm society, or at the very least, large segments within it. With the emergence of the capitalist era, an inevitable offshoot of this very freedom, it became evident that individual liberty itself had turned into an illusion, devoid of substance in the real world. It was transformed into a mere license for exploitation, where capital preyed upon the working classes. Thus, it became necessary to conceive a new understanding of freedom, one distinct from that which the French Revolution had once heralded, or to adopt an entirely different principle in its stead. In either case, it appears that this principle, as understood in the French Revolution, has exhausted its purpose and can no longer serve as a constructive force in human life. Indeed, even in France today, its meaning has faded, reduced to nothing more than the liberty of unrestrained desire, the hallmark of existentialist thought. The meaning of equality in the French Revolution was equality in political and legal rights, ensuring that every individual enjoyed the same privileges in elections and before the courts. At that time, this notion rendered a great service to European society, for it subjected both the church and the nobility to the jurisdiction of ordinary courts and common laws that governed the general populace. It also made them liable to public taxation, and abolished the exclusive privileges that had once given the class system its odious character, degrading the human worth of the vast majority. Yet, little by little, it became apparent that this legal equality could not be realized in a material world where economic balance was absent, where society was divided into property owners and capitalists on one side and weak, powerless workers on the other. The dynamics of production gave rise to a form of oppression under which these theoretical rights, enshrined in law, crumbled in practice. Thus the principle of equality faltered. To make it a tangible reality in a world like the Western one, it required guarantees beyond mere legal assurances, economic safeguards, and a restructuring of production relations that did not rest upon the principle of freedom as the revolution had envisioned it. This means that the principle of equality, in its revolutionary sense, has likewise exhausted its purpose and can no longer exert a constructive influence on human life. As for the principle of fraternity, it never truly possessed any real meaning in the Western world, for its realization demands more than mere material conditions. It requires spirit and conscience. It necessitates an entirely different outlook on life and humanity, one that transcends the materialistic worldview that has dominated Europe since the days of Rome, and which Christianity failed to alter in any significant way. Thus, from the very outset, fraternity remained a theoretical notion, spoken of in speeches and inscribed in books and newspapers, yet devoid of any practical significance in real life. For the sentiment of human brotherhood is far greater than a mere local revolution, especially one that, even while proclaiming fraternity, does not hesitate to engage in conquest and colonization for the sake of material gain and economic privilege. To truly embrace human brotherhood is to rise above the narrow confines of nationalism and the blind fervour of racial superiority, something Europe has never attempted. Thus, fraternity was reduced to little more than a dazzling slogan in the principles of the French Revolution. And so, Europe and America have become barren, unable to offer humanity anything new in this realm. Instead, they have turned toward the material domain, toward industry producing new marvels every day. But mankind cannot live indefinitely on the fruits of factories alone. It has an urgent, perpetual need for principles, for new ideas that allow it to grow, to expand, to evolve, and to ascend within the framework of these principles and ideas. Yet European-American civilization has ultimately confined itself to the pursuit of industrial output, while in the realm of principles it has remained stagnant, endlessly regurgitating the slogans of the French Revolution, slogans that have long since lost their meaning. Here emerged the communist idea, or rather the materialist interpretation of history, for it occupies, in the realm of ideologies, a broader space than that which the principles of the French Revolution had reached in the Western world. It engages human communities with a purpose far greater than the narrow individualistic aim represented, for instance, by existentialism in France, or the philosophy of pragmatism in America, which is centered around practical utility. For communism now captivates these human groups with the realization of a grand collective goal, the dominance of the working class. Thus, it offers a human dream that transcends the mere lives and desires of individuals, no matter how limited this dream may be when measured against the vastness and nobility of human existence. Yet it remains, nevertheless, a dream that Western civilization, after the days of the French Revolution, no longer contains within itself. It is from this void that the violent surge toward communism among Europeans arises, even among those who feel no pangs of hunger in their stomachs, nor the sting of nakedness upon their skin. Yet they remain human beings, sensing the absolute emptiness at the heart of white man's civilization, unable to find within it the nourishment, intellectual and spiritual, without which human existence cannot be sustained. For man has been man since the dawn of his being, always in need of a creed to fill his heart, a creed that explains life to him, binds him to it, and preoccupies him with something beyond his own self, something greater than his mere existence. Thus, when the civilization of the white man in Europe and America exhausted this essential sustenance, when it was reduced in the material realm to mere production, and in the human realm to mere gratification, a deep hunger for a universal principle arose within him, a principle that would connect him to life as a whole, an idea that he could struggle to realize. And when he looked around him, he found nothing but communism to fulfill this urgent need, an ideology that, at the same time, represents the natural next step in the trajectory of Western materialist civilization. Communism is, indeed, the natural extension of the materialist conception of life, an ideology that the Western world has embraced since the rise of its civilization upon the foundations of the materialist Roman heritage. This materialist inclination only intensified with Francis Bacon, culminating in the empirical materialist method, which believes only in what the senses can perceive or what laboratory experiments can verify, experiments that are, in essence, merely an extension of sensory perception. The difference between communism and the prevailing ideas in the West today is not a difference in the nature of thought itself, but rather in its scope and in the method of organization. The materialist conception of life remains the same. The difference lies in whether economic enterprise is absolutely free, as in America, or somewhat restricted or nationalized, as in Britain, or whether state ownership is absolute, with private enterprise entirely abolished, as in Russia. As for the rule of the working class, it remains the great communist dream, one that even in Russia itself has yet to be realized. All that has been achieved thus far is the destruction of the landowning class and the transfer of all public ownership to the state. But the working class itself possesses neither power nor wealth. It remains merely a mobilized workforce, drafted into labor in return for a bare sufficiency of food, drink, shelter and clothing. Yet communism continues to carry this dream, one that draws millions towards it. For in comparison to the hollow void of Western civilization, it is a grand dream indeed. And the clearest proof that Westerners are enchanted by communism more for its idealistic vision than for any tangible personal benefit is that those who embrace and promote communism in America are not, for the most part, from the ranks of the impoverished working class. Rather, they are intellectuals, people of thought and ideas. This was a phenomenon that caught my attention when I was there, and I later found its explanation. The vast majority of Americans have no genuine economic motive to adopt communism. The levels of wages, earnings, and the general standard of living render communism neither alluring nor attractive, for it offers the American worker nothing of real value in his life, while stripping him of many things he cherishes, depriving him of real advantages he would otherwise enjoy. Yet the American intellectuals, more than any others, feel the acute hunger for intellectual and spiritual sustenance. They are more profoundly aware of the emptiness of Western materialistic civilization, of that essential human nourishment without which no soul can truly survive, even if it deceives itself into believing it has no need for it. And since the American, like the Westerner in general, knows no other idea that could take the place of faith in his soul, he rushes toward communism with the desperation of one fleeing starvation, seeking escape from the crushing void, intellectual and spiritual, that suffocates him. But when economic conditions in America change, as they have already changed in Europe, communism will surge there just as violently as it has surged across Europe. For then, to the spiritual emptiness will be added the pressures of material necessity. And since there exists no other idea powerful enough to resist the communist ideology, this is the natural course of evolution in the Western world as a whole, the inevitable extension of materialist thought within Western civilization. For communism is the natural culmination of a civilization devoid of spirit, empty of ideals, stripped of dreams. This transformation is anticipated and expected, and America is moving toward it, inevitably compelled by its need to arm itself, which demands vast expenditures that must, of necessity, come at the cost of individual prosperity, compelled by its need to support Europe, to pay the tribute that keeps it within its sphere, whether through the Marshall Plan or before it, the Lend-Lease Act, compelled likewise by its obligation to allocate resources to what it calls underdeveloped countries in the form of Truman's Point 4 program. All these initiatives drain the American budget significantly. And while, for now, the economy may still bear these burdens, signs of strain have already appeared, and the American financial system is beginning to falter under the weight impacting the standard of living. This imbalance between the gravitational pull of communism and the resisting force of American capitalism will continue to shift, one moment tipping precariously, the next plunging further still. It is this precarious balance that compels America to hasten toward war, hoping that by eliminating its adversary Russia, it may reduce its military expenditures and ease the burden of its massive financial commitments. In any case, communism remains the inevitable outcome of Europe's materialist civilization. And today, the Western man finds in communism the sustenance of faith that he no longer finds in the remnants of his own civilization, one that has exhausted its purpose, leaving behind no reserve of that essential nourishment upon which the human soul depends in every time and place. And a man such as Bertrand Russell, foreseeing the future of communism not only in the atomic age but also in Asia, declares, "The Russian is the only white man who has the opportunity to extend his influence in Asia." The Asian peoples detest Western colonialism, and they do not believe that the Kremlin has imperialist ambitions, for they have not yet experienced its rule, whereas they have endured generations under the yoke of the Western man, and they loathe that experience. Thus, I do not believe that the Western nations have any real future in Asia. I do, however, believe that India may coexist with the Western world. But as for the Arab world, including Egypt and Pakistan, it will inevitably align itself with the communist camp. We find ourselves in disagreement with the philosopher regarding this particular aspect of his prophecy. His vision, after all, springs from his European conscience and his European experiences, as well as from his ignorance of the nature of the prevailing idea in this part of the world, by which I mean the Muslim nation, of which he specifically mentioned Egypt and Pakistan. Communism, as we have already stated, is but the natural extension of the materialistic civilization of Europe. It surpasses that civilization in at least one respect. It contains a dream regardless of its nature and worth, whereas Western civilization is entirely devoid of such a dream. Communism offers the vast majority of people who cannot find within the fabric of Western civilization anything that might occupy the place of a creed in their souls, a promise of social and economic transformation. It shatters the inequalities that plague them, or at the very least, pledges to do so. True, communism has been compelled to grant exceptional privileges to engineers, as well as other privileges to artists whose talents serve the needs of the state. But matters stand entirely differently within the Islamic sphere. Here, the European experiments cannot be applied, for the fundamental nature of the two civilizations is not the same. The dominant ideas, the historical experiences, the psychological residues, the aspirations and the dreams, these all differ in essence and in depth. Communism, with its materialistic dream that occupies the place of faith in the Western soul, and with its promise of economic justice, at least in comparison to the capitalist system that dominates the Western world, may well suffice to meet the needs of the West in this period of its history. It may also suffice to meet the needs of the Chinese people, the Korean people, and other such nations that possess no ideals greater than those which communism seeks to demolish. But this sufficiency is only temporary, only until such time as they wrest themselves free from the grip of capitalist imperialism and achieve economic equilibrium within their societies. And yet, once these immediate material dreams are realized, once the burden of social oppression is lifted, it is highly probable that the human spirit will awaken to seek something beyond. For then, it will begin to feel the same emptiness that the European soul experiences today in the midst of its material civilization. This indeed is what we anticipate will happen in Russia itself, if not within a single generation, then within a few generations. Communism, by its own admission, offers nothing beyond the annihilation of the bourgeois class and the enthronement of the proletariat. In doing so, however, it stifles all other aspirations of the human soul, severs its ties to the universe and to life's deeper meanings, and shuts off all its pathways to the heavens. It wages war against religious faith just as it wages war against intoxicants. And since the dream that communism offers is confined to the material realm, limited within the boundaries of time, it will inevitably lose its enchantment once it is realized. It will then lose its ability to lead even Russia itself, let alone the Western world, toward the future. As for the entirety of mankind, it seeks something beyond mere material fulfillment. Material prosperity and industrial civilization alone are not enough to fill the void within the human soul. Is this not evidenced by the fact that many of America's intellectuals are now gravitating toward communism? Is it not evidenced by the fact that, despite its towering industrial achievements, America is unable to stem the tide of communist thought? Thus, humanity, even in the very heart of material civilization, even in the very stronghold of communism, must inevitably search for an idea greater than communism, for objectives loftier than those of communism, for a dream that shimmers on the horizon calling mankind toward its fulfillment. Only in this way can human beings continue their journey, only in this way can they progress, only in this way can they truly live. Indeed, the hunger of the body demands to be satisfied first, this is undeniable. But once it is stilled, another hunger stirs within the human being, a hunger that no food can satiate, no drink can quench, no clothing can cover, and no physical pleasure can subdue. It is a hunger of an entirely different kind, a hunger that can only be appeased by a purpose greater than mere enjoyment, by a connection to the universe more profound than the immediate environment, by a faith in a power transcending human existence, and by a vision of the future that knows no limits. If humanity should come upon a system that embodies such an idea, that embraces such a creed, and that simultaneously guarantees perpetual and dynamic social justice that does not merely replace one dominant class with another, nor halt at the threshold of material sufficiency, but rather allows life to remain ever renewing, ever ascending, and above all, ever connected to the heavens, then that would be the eternal dream of mankind, the dream untouched by corruption. This is why we diverge from the Western philosopher in the conclusions drawn from his Western conscience. This is why we firmly believe that the future of Islam, within the lands of Islam, is assured, and that the future of the world itself belongs to Islam. Communism may well sweep across Europe today, and tomorrow it may sweep across America. But this will not be because its material resources are vaster, nor because its productive capacity is greater, nor because its scientific advancements surpass those of the West. None of these material reasons suffice to explain its advance. Rather, its appeal lies in the fact that it offers Western man an idea of life, a purpose for life, something that Western civilization has lost the ability to provide. In this sense, communism appears as a progressive idea when compared to the material civilization of the West. In other words, it allows life under its shadow to extend for a time, whereas Western philosophy, in its current form, is incapable of such extension, and life under it can no longer move forward. Yet, as we have already explained, communism is an idea whose fulfillment is limited to a short span of time. Once realized, it will lose its momentum and become incapable of further expansion. Life under its rule will stagnate even in those parts of the world that have fully embraced its materialist philosophy. What then can be expected in those lands whose civilizations have been nourished by a spiritual heritage, whose world view encompasses a vision of life broader and deeper than that of communism, and whose inherent flexibility and vastness render them far more capable of growth and renewal? Today, communism plays a crucial role in the material civilization of the West. That role consists in consuming the remnants of the materialist ideology that has dominated Europe since the days of the Roman Empire, an ideology that has now reached its inevitable state of sterility. Communism is the final and ultimate stage in the trajectory of material civilization. Indeed, it proclaims itself to be the final link in the chain of dialectical materialism, which holds that every system carries within itself contradictions that will ultimately lead to its downfall and the emergence of a new system. This process, according to communist thought, continues until it culminates in the establishment of communism, which is to be the final destination of history. Had we not possessed a different vision of life, one that regards existence as an ever-renewing, ever-evolving journey, we might have been inclined to believe this claim. But we know that life does not stand still at the point where the communists would like it to stop. It must inevitably move forward beyond the confines of communism, for humanity cannot do without an idea in which to believe, a purpose for which to strive. The violent materialistic upheaval that culminated in communism within Western civilization was but a reaction to the rigid dogmatism of Christianity as it was shaped by the Church in the Middle Ages. The atheism embraced by modern science was likewise a reaction to the Church's persecution of scholars. But this is not, as the communists claim, an immutable law of existence. It is merely the consequence of historical circumstances, a consequence that, like all things, shall pass. Thus, when the opposing wave reaches its ultimate end, namely communism, humanity shall return after these two waves to a certain equilibrium and moderation. This balance will not be found in the ethereal spirituality of Christianity, nor in the rigid materialism of communism, but rather in a middle path, a vision of life that embraces pure, sincere spirituality, while also upholding a tempered material realism, forging from the two a creed for the conscience, a system for life, and an everlasting dream for humanity. One that, with every realization, ascends towards yet another horizon, another dream to be fulfilled. And the only idea that mankind has ever known, in which these very attributes are realized, is Islam's conception of the universe, life, and man. Europe indeed should have long ago reaped the fruits of this idea, had it not, due to historical circumstances, stood in its way during its first great surge, when Islam reached the borders of the Pyrenees. Not only did Europe resist it, but its fierce bigotry drove it to expel the faith from Andalusia with merciless severity. Perhaps, however, this was a matter of divine decree, for humanity at that time was not yet fully prepared to receive this light and benefit from its radiance in its initial outpouring. It had yet to undergo long experiences, to endure the harsh reaction against its first rigid dogmas and primal ignorance. It had to be cast violently into the realm of materialism, so that it might create within this domain whatever God willed, preparing itself through its spiritual struggles, intellectual advancements, and scientific discoveries to receive that light anew in another cycle of its unfolding and in yet another wave of its resurgence. Only then, after reaching the barren emptiness that material civilization inevitably leads to, would it return, if only for a time, to communism, experiencing within it an even greater void, a thirst more intense, and a yearning for a well-balanced harmony after having been tossed between the extremes of excessive spirituality and overwhelming materialism, suspended, as it were, in mid-air between earth and sky. Be that as it may, we do not doubt that the leadership of humanity is destined to return to Islam, for if Islam did not exist, mankind would be compelled to seek it out, to fashion for itself a system resembling it once the tides of the two preceding waves, standing in stark opposition to one another, had receded. The second of these waves was but a violent reaction to the first, and now the wave of extreme materialism has nearly reached its ultimate limit. It is only a matter of time before communism sweeps across what remains of Western civilization, rising to its highest crest only for humanity, by its very nature, to begin searching for a new nourishment to rescue it from the spiritual void it can endure but for a limited time. From all this, the magnitude of the duty that awaits the Muslim world becomes manifest, a duty owed not merely to itself, but to all of humanity in its most perilous hour. This humanity, which once closed its doors to Islam when it first came to it in its initial surge, will soon find itself in desperate longing for a force that can rescue it from its emptiness and provide sustenance for its starving soul. And it will be more capable of understanding Islam than it was when it first turned away from it. The duty of the Muslim world, then, is to offer this nourishment in a form that aligns with all of humanity's experiences over the past 14 centuries. It is a colossal task, requiring preparation from this very moment. And since human nature, by its intrinsic disposition, is inclined to perceive an idea through tangible reality, to embody faith in concrete action, and to judge ideals and principles by what they bring forth in the realm of life, then, when mankind turns its gaze toward a new dawn that might save it from the darkness and aridity of materialism, it will not seek mere abstract theories, but rather a living, breathing societal model. Herein lies the duty that the divine will has placed upon our shoulders, the duty to be, in our very selves, a living testimony to our faith and our principles, such that our social order becomes a practical translation of these beliefs, so that, when bewildered, humanity turns its searching gaze toward a new source of light, it may find in us the vision it seeks. At this point, I shall confine myself to a brief assertion, one that we shall later elucidate in detail. There has never existed in all of human history an idea more vast, more expansive, and more capable of growth and renewal in organizing the world as a unified human entity, in shaping society as a cohesive human collective, than Islam's vision of the universe, life, and man. No system has ever been more balanced, more just, or more attuned to the natural order, more liberating of the noble forces and energies that cultivate and elevate life. And when this truth is established, then the decline of Islam's first great wave should not be seen as proof that its purpose had been exhausted. Rather, its correct interpretation is that humanity at that time was not yet ready for the full realization of Islam's message. That which was achieved in that era was no insignificant matter if we are to be just, drawing only upon historical facts, untainted by prejudiced propaganda or exaggerated claims. It was Islam that first presented to the world the principles of freedom, justice, brotherhood, and equality, at a time when the Persian and Roman empires ruled with feudal oppression and terror, dividing people into masters and slaves, even questioning whether a white woman possessed a human soul. It was thus no wonder that Christians and Jews, along with all those subjected to these imperial dominions, hastened to embrace these new principles, the like of which humanity had never known before. And these principles ultimately prevailed, becoming the very ideals of all mankind, but only after 11 centuries had passed, when Europe adopted them in the modern era, in the wake of the French Revolution. Yet even then, Neither in the realm of ideals nor in the domain of institutions did Europe reach the heights Islam had attained in its earliest days. For the materialistic legacy inherited from the Roman state had never truly allowed Europe to grasp these Islamic principles with its conscience. Rather, it absorbed them only outwardly, after its contact with the Muslim world through the Crusades. Indeed, every intellectual awakening and revolutionary movement in Europe can be traced back to this encounter. Through this contact, Islam was able to influence the European Renaissance in ways that even the official religion of Europe, Christianity, could not. This ultimately was due to the inherent nature of Islam, its affirmative, constructive spirit, as opposed to the passive, otherworldly orientation of Christianity when it came to the practical organization of society. Christianity never possessed the power to fully shape Western civilization, which remained deeply rooted in Roman traditions, for it never presented a clear practical model of the society. It envisioned only a poetic, ethereal image of the individual it wished to cultivate. Islam, however, not only offered an idea, but also provided its tangible realization in the form of a living society. And even though the Islamic societies of Andalusia and the Crusader period did not fully embody the ideal form of Islam, the remnants of its grand vision, its intellectual and material civilization, were enough to dazzle the Europeans of that time, propelling them powerfully toward their own Renaissance, igniting in their minds the ideals of freedom, brotherhood and equality principles later crystallized in the French Revolution, the last great surge of Western civilization in the realm of human ideals. These historical facts alone are sufficient to lead us toward a certain interpretation of the first great surge of Islam and its subsequent halt. It is the interpretation we have already alluded to that humanity, at that particular moment in time, was not yet prepared to bear more than what it had already received of that eternal sustenance. The long and arduous experiences of mankind thereafter were destined to render it more capable of embracing this divine gift, more able to benefit from it than at any previous epoch. And all this only increases the burden upon our shoulders, the solemn responsibility of representing the ideas and systems brought forth by this religion, so that they may remain the enduring sustenance of humanity, to which mankind may return, time and time again, drawing from it the strength needed to propel itself forward upon the long road of life. In this study, God willing, we shall present the structures and foundations of the Islamic society, both as it may be realized in the near present and as it may evolve in the distant future. Through this presentation, we shall discern the vast, ever-renewing potential of this system irrespective of the historical forms it has hitherto assumed, for these are not, as many mistakenly believe, the only possible manifestations of Islam. 1. Al-Ahram newspaper, dated August 9th, 1951. 2. Ibid. 3. This idea has been outlined in general terms in my book, Social Justice in Islam, and I intend, God willing, to elaborate upon it in an independent work. 4. From the book Islam and the World Order by Mulay Muhammad Ali, translated by Ahmad Judah al-Sahar. 5. Gospel of Matthew 5:24. How shall we derive inspiration from Islam? If, as we have stated, the future belongs to Islam's vision of life and to the social order that emanates from it, because it is the most conducive system known to mankind for the growth and elevation of life. Because the idea from which it springs is one of the most vital, most comprehensive concepts humanity has ever encountered, encompassing the ever-renewing needs of humankind. If this indeed is its reality, and I hope that this study, through its exposition of the foundations of Islamic society, will succeed in demonstrating it, then how then shall we derive inspiration from Islam in order to extract and articulate these foundations? Before we attempt to do so, it is imperative that we agree upon certain principles, that we adopt a particular methodology in deriving inspiration from Islam and seeking guidance from it, lest the matter descend into chaos, or be left to mere conjecture and whim. At the outset, two great truths must be made clear. First, Islamic Sharia and Islamic fiqh are two distinct entities. They are not identical neither in their sources nor in their authority, and our approach to deriving the foundations and structures of Islamic society from them must necessarily differ. Second, the historical forms of the Islamic society are not its final definitive manifestations. Rather, there are ever-renewing forms that may rightfully bear the name Islamic, forms that emerge from the comprehensive Islamic vision and exist within its overarching framework. The elucidation of these two truths is of paramount importance, for they determine the methodology we must adopt in deriving inspiration from Islam and seeking its guidance in the social sphere. Islamic Sharia is immutable and unchanging, for it constitutes the fundamental principles and overarching tenets of this noble religion, the faith that God has chosen for all of mankind. Indeed, the only religion in the sight of God is Islam. Quran 3:19. And whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted from him. Quran 3:85. This Sharia was perfected in the lifetime of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and was brought to its intended culmination, decreed to endure for all eternity. This day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and have approved for you Islam as your religion. Quran 5:3. It has also been established as a system of governance and a constitution for action, one that cannot be disregarded, one from which no Muslim may deviate. And whoever does not judge by what God has revealed, then it is they who are the disbelievers. Quran 5:44. And whatever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you, abstain from it. Quran 59:7. Yet life is ever surging forward, its needs and demands continually evolving, the relationships between people shifting, the methods of labor and production transforming. New circumstances emerge, new emotions take root, new aspirations arise. How then can a fixed idea address these ever-changing needs? How can these needs and circumstances evolve and flourish under the guidance of an unchanging principle? This is precisely what Islamic Sharia foresaw before all else. It was revealed not as a rigid, inflexible statute, but in the form of comprehensive principles and overarching guidelines capable of giving rise to countless dynamic social frameworks, all existing within its grand design. These frameworks may differ in their details and applications as much as necessary, so long as they do not contravene the steadfast objectives and eternal aims that pertain to man in his essential human nature, not as a mere individual bound by time and place, not as a single generation confined to a fleeting moment in history. We are well aware of the aversion certain materialist ideologies, particularly Marxism, harbor toward immutable principles and enduring values. They perceive such constants as obstacles to their vision of perpetual evolution, as impediments to their drive to dismantle abstract ideals. But we approach the matter with a broader perspective than that of materialists who remain shackled by their narrow vision. We do not see an inherent contradiction between the existence of fixed objectives and the process of continuous evolution. To regard the advancement of life as a fixed objective does not negate life's ability to develop toward that objective. To acknowledge humanity as an interconnected continuum, bound by interwoven aims, does not deny each generation's right to mould its own aspirations in a manner suited to its circumstances, its inherited traditions, and the impulses of its age. Yet in essence, these aspirations do not sever themselves from that continuous thread, nor do they diverge from that enduring goal. Thus, it becomes evident that the rigidity of certain perspectives, their narrowness, and their authoritarian insistence on proving a particular theory are what drive Marxists to reject fixed ideals with such vehemence. But the broader vision, the vision that embraces intellectual freedom, that contemplates the long arc of human history, aligns wholly with the Islamic perspective, which regards life, as it regards humanity, as an interconnected sequence of phases unfolding across time. It establishes for mankind's enduring aspirations firm, unchanging foundations in the Sharia, while entrusting fiqh with the task of addressing life's ever-evolving needs and circumstances within the bounds of that immutable Sharia. Thus, Islamic Sharia remains unchanged, its vast, all-encompassing framework capable of accommodating every transformation. Meanwhile, Islamic fiqh evolves, responding to new realities, for it is concerned with the legal applications of those universal principles in the ever-shifting landscape of human affairs. Islamic Sharia is of divine origin. Its source is the Quran and the Sunnah. Islamic fiqh, however, is the work of human minds, derived from their understanding, interpretation and application of Sharia in specific circumstances, in response to particular needs, and inspired by the conditions of their time, their perception of matters, their estimation of objectives and ends, and the practical considerations dictated by the realities of their world. No matter how profound the vision of those men who compiled Islamic fiqh, no matter how keen their insight into the spirit and purposes of Sharia, no matter how vast their horizons or precise their judgments, and indeed they possessed all these qualities, one must always bear in mind that their legal formulations were shaped by the real needs of their era. Even the theoretical assumptions they postulated and answered were, in essence, reflections of those needs or emanations of the intellectual framework of their environment, their age, their society, and the interwoven relationships prevailing therein. This fundamental truth is not limited to the scholars who bore the title of faqih in later generations. It extends even to the companions of the Prophet, may God be pleased with them, after his passing. Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Umar, and their brethren, without a doubt, were the most perceptive of all men regarding the essence of Islam, the most profound in their comprehension of its principles and directions. Yet their applications of Sharia do not depart from this fundamental rule. They were responses shaped by the exigencies of their environment and the imperatives of their time. Their rulings can never be considered a sacred, immutable part of Sharia, for the sole sources of Sharia are the Quran and the Sunnah of the Messenger alone. Everything beyond these two sources belongs to the realm of fiqh, whose authority varies in degree from one ruling to another, serving as a guiding light for subsequent generations, illuminating the path of understanding, offering direction in matters of application and deduction. Before delving into the details of this principle, it is essential to distinguish between two great streams within Islamic fiqh, the stream of ibadat, acts of worship, and the stream of mu'amalat, social transactions. Although there exists an intrinsic connection between them in the nature of the Islamic worldview, fiqh concerning acts of worship remains more stable and unchanging, for it pertains to devotional rites unaffected by the passage of time and the succession of generations. The fiqh of transactions, on the other hand, is far more dynamic, for it is shaped by the ever-evolving needs of humanity, needs that do not remain fixed, but shift and transform with the complexities of relationships, the fluctuations of circumstances, and the emergence of new social structures and interactions that had never before been envisaged. It is the fiqh of transactions that concerns us in this study, for it is this discipline that governs the organization of society, the management of public affairs, and the regulation of relationships in every facet of life. This fiqh is, in essence, the repeated response to the ever-renewing demands of life, an adaptation of Sharia's immutable principles into specific legal applications suited to the ever-changing realities of the Muslim community. And it is beyond dispute, as I have already stated, that men like Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Ibn Abbas, and Ibn Umar, may God be pleased with them, possessed the deepest understanding of Sharia and the keenest insight into its spirit. Their applications of it in the cases that arose after the Prophet's passing were the wisest and most precise. Yet this does not negate the fact that their rulings were responses to the pressing needs of their time, shaped by the realities of their moment. Since social conditions never repeat themselves exactly in history, but only resemble one another in broad strokes, no past ruling, unless it originates from divine revelation or the direct practice of the messenger, can be regarded as binding in an absolute sense. Rather, such rulings serve as a source of guidance and inspiration for subsequent generations when encountering similar situations. But they do not reach the level of obligatory law, for they remain, after all, human interpretations of God's Sharia, not an integral part of the Sharia itself. If we acknowledge this principle in relation to the caliphs and companions of the Prophet, then it becomes all the more self-evident when applied to the scholars of later generations, the founders of the various schools of thought, and those who followed in their footsteps. This pertains to the distinction between Sharia and fiqh. As for the nature of society and its evolution, it must be understood that the historical forms of the Islamic society do not encompass all the possible manifestations of an Islamic social order. Every generation has the right to develop its own social structures within the framework of Islamic principles, to address the needs of its time through fiqh-based reasoning rooted in the universal foundations of Sharia, provided that these efforts adhere to sound methodologies of ijtihad and are undertaken in agreement with the collective wisdom of the scholars of the Muslim community in every age. For we cannot leave this matter to chaos, allowing anyone to legislate as they please without restraint or discipline. By affirming these principles, the historical precedents in Islamic social organization, where no explicit text from Sharia exists, become signposts that guide and beacons that illuminate, rather than rigid moles that bind. This allows for the enrichment of Islamic governance through the accumulated experiences of human civilization, while safeguarding the enduring characteristics of the Islamic social vision and the distinctive features that Islam came to establish within human society. It must be made clear that Islam did not merely come to establish a fleeting civilization, a brief moment, a passing glimmer in the vast expanse of history. The supreme miracle of Islam is that it preserves its foundational principles and essential characteristics while, at the same time, permitting the emergence of diverse social forms and institutions, all rooted in those very principles and characteristics. And the reason for this extraordinary balance lies in the fact that the principles and characteristics of Islam are governed by the same law that governs human nature, that governs the course of human life, that in truth governs the entirety of existence. This law embodies both permanence and continuity, yet at the same time it embraces evolution and freedom as integral parts of its essence. Thus, the ceaseless evolution of human civilization does not stand in opposition to the fixed nature of Sharia, for both are governed by the same fundamental law at their core. With regard to the branches and applications required by society to keep pace with the ever-renewing demands of time, the matter does not extend beyond four possibilities. The first possibility, that the Sharia has explicitly stipulated a particular ruling in clear and unequivocal terms. In such a case, it is to be applied as it stands, without alteration or modification. This is because such a ruling is either related to a fundamental pillar of the Islamic society, one that was meant to endure, being intrinsic to its very essence and distinguishing it from all other societies, such as the explicit prohibition of usury, for usury stands in direct and irreconcilable opposition to the economic and social foundation upon which Islam seeks to establish its community. There exists no means to reconcile the two, nor to amend that foundational principle. Or it may be connected to an essential characteristic of this society, one that was intended to be upheld and preserved for the sake of a perpetual objective that remains valid for all times and places, such as the prescribed penal laws of Islam, which were instituted to uphold certain ethical principles meant to endure within the Islamic society. Alternatively, it may pertain to a legislative principle whose essence remains unaltered by the passage of time or by the shifting of circumstances, such as the requirement to document deferred debts, except in cases of commercial transactions, and to secure them with witnesses alongside the written contract. In contrast, immediate transactions may be validated by the testimony of witnesses alone. The wisdom of this ruling lies in its alignment with the conditions of financial dealings, ensuring its suitability and continuity. When we examine the immutable rulings of the Sharia, we find that they all revolve around such considerations. Their permanence, therefore, does not signify rigidity, for they are tethered to enduring objectives. In this way, the law governing them aligns with the law governing life and nature, a law that is fixed in its essence, yet dynamic in its particulars. It is but a part of the greater cosmic order which harmonizes between permanence and movement in every instant and in every detail. Just as we witness the constancy of the celestial spheres alongside their motion, the steadfastness of life amidst its ceaseless flux, and the stability of society even as it evolves. The nature upon which God has fashioned mankind, there can be no altering of God's creation. Quran 30:30. The second possibility, that the Sharia has provided a textual ruling, yet one that is open to interpretation. In such a case, it falls within the domain of ijtihad, whether by way of weighing and reconciling different texts, if such variance exists, or by harmonizing a singular text with the specific circumstances to which it is to be applied. This process must be guided by practical precedents from the early days of Islam, if such examples exist, and by the insights of jurists on the issue, though without binding ourselves entirely to their interpretations, for their rulings were but direct responses to the exigencies of their own time. The third possibility, that the Sharia has laid down a general principle under which this particular issue falls implicitly, though it is not explicitly mentioned. In such a case, it remains a matter of ijtihad, wherein the general principle must be applied to the specific issue at hand, with due consideration given to historical precedents and jurisprudential rulings, though merely as points of reference rather than binding authorities. The fourth possibility, that the Sharia has remained silent on the matter, leaving it open to unrestricted ijtihad, provided that the ruling derived does not contradict any fundamental principle of Islam, nor any of its essential legislative foundations. In such cases, we may take guidance from the approaches adopted by the jurists of Islam in similar situations. By adhering to this methodology, we preserve the flexibility of Islamic thought, ensure the dynamism of the Islamic system, and liberate ourselves from the complexities of later jurisprudential elaborations, those intricate formulations that have, in the post-classical era, sown despair in the hearts of those who seek to revive Islamic law. Many mistakenly assume that these later formulations constitute the very essence of the Sharia, and that knowledge of Islam is unattainable without an exhaustive study of them. Yet in truth, jurisprudential rulings are nothing more than human attempts to interpret and apply the divine law, attempts that were suited to their own time, shaped by the spirit and understanding of their particular age. These interpretations may not necessarily be valid beyond their own historical context. A correct understanding of the spirit of Islam and its approach to life necessitates that we continually return to the simple, fundamental tenets of the Sharia, drawing from them the guidance needed for our own time, just as the great jurists of the past did in response to the needs of their own generation. A further clarification of this methodology. The growth and evolution of Islamic jurisprudence continued up until the 8th century, Hijri, after the passing of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, evolving in tandem with the expansion of the Islamic society and adapting to its ever-emerging needs. This was possible because the Sharia remained the governing force over the society, directing its course in most of its affairs. I say in most of its affairs, not in all, because the political and economic policies of governance had to some extent deviated from the principles of Islam since the advent of dynastic rule under Muawiyah, marking the end of the rightly guided caliphate. Though these deviations were minor in their inception, they gradually expanded, and correspondingly the luminous presence of the Sharia began to recede from various spheres of societal activity. As this withdrawal continued, the development of Islamic jurisprudence likewise contracted in those very areas where the influence of the Sharia waned, while it flourished in those domains left untouched by the encroachments of wayward rulers. It was from this historical process that the disproportionate emphasis on ritual jurisprudence in later centuries arose, while the jurisprudence of social and political systems diminished. The realm of worship was deemed a safe domain, where theoretical discourse posed no political threat, whereas engaging in legal discussions about governance and economic justice could provoke the ire of those in power. In some cases, this proliferation of legal disputation within the domain of worship even served as a distraction, preoccupying the minds of the people with intricate theological debates, thereby deflecting their attention from the pressing social injustices of their time. Yet despite these challenges, Islamic jurisprudence achieved remarkable advancements in all its disciplines up until the 8th century Hijri, particularly in the arenas of criminal law and civil legislation. And so it is with commercial legislation, this very domain from which Europe once derived great benefit, having borrowed extensively from the Islamic society of Andalusia, an influence that still echoes in its modern commercial laws. Yet Islamic jurisprudence, in this field as in many others, largely ceased to evolve after the 8th century of the Hijra, mirroring the stagnation that befell the Muslim world itself. The dynamic movement of society slowed, and with it, the need for fresh legal interpretations waned. Thus, when the tides of history surged forward in the past 3 centuries, when life leaped ahead in great strides, transforming human civilization in ways unforeseen, Islamic jurisprudence found itself unprepared to keep pace with this newfound dynamism. A vast historical chasm emerged, severing the continuity of Islamic legal thought and its ability to address the ever-multiplying demands of a rapidly evolving world. What, then, are we to do today if we seek to reinstate the authority of Islamic law within our contemporary society? Before us lie 2 paths. The first, we may attempt to resume Islamic jurisprudence from where it left off, reconstructing its course so as to bridge this wide and deep chasm. But for such a development to be organic rather than artificial, we must retrace the social conditions and daily necessities that unfolded over the past 3 centuries, studying them with a jurisprudential lens so that we may bring this body of law into the present age in a natural and unbroken progression, just as it had evolved seamlessly within the first 8 centuries of Islam. Yet, given that the precise social conditions of past centuries cannot be fully grasped in retrospect, our endeavour would inevitably rely upon conjectures that may well lead us astray. Moreover, this approach would be somewhat contrived, for it would not arise from an actual and present need for a particular legal ruling, but rather from abstract hypotheses concerning needs that no longer press upon us. Time has moved forward, leaving certain past concerns behind, and to devise laws for bygone circumstances would be an exercise in futility. Without such an organic expansion of Islamic jurisprudence to bring it into alignment with the present, any attempt to apply it directly to modern social life beyond mere intellectual reference would be arbitrary and incapable of offering comprehensive solutions to our contemporary challenges. The second, we may return directly to the essence of Islamic law itself, to its overarching principles, its universal injunctions, seeking therein the foundations for practical solutions to the problems of our time, just as the scholars of old did when they turned to divine guidance to address the needs of their own era. In doing so, we must take heed of their methodology in applying the law, drawing upon their insights while also engaging with the realities of our present condition. This, in my view, is the rational course to follow, if not the only viable one. And upon this course we shall proceed as we seek to delineate the essential characteristics of the Islamic society. A society that we believe to be the society of the future, not merely for the Muslim world, but for all of humanity. The nature of the Islamic society. What indeed does the term Islamic society signify? Does this society bear a distinct character? And if so, does it correspond in any way to the social systems that humanity has known throughout history? The entirety of our inquiry is, in essence, an answer to these questions. Yet I wish here to anticipate the discussion by briefly affirming certain fundamental truths about the nature of the Islamic society, clarifying some of the misconceptions that trouble even those who advocate for Islam, and refuting the falsehoods that are widely propagated by its adversaries, or by those who, knowing little beyond its outer forms, misunderstand its reality. The Western world has known various forms of social organization. It has witnessed the age of slavery, the feudal system, the capitalist order, the socialist experiment, and the communist ideal, at least in its philosophical conception, if not in its full realization in practical life. Which among these, then, is the system of Islam? It is none of them, this much is certain, nor is it a mere amalgamation of elements drawn from several of these systems. even if superficial resemblances may occasionally be found between certain aspects of Islamic society and aspects of one or more of these historical models. The fundamental reason for the distinctiveness of the Islamic social order lies in its origin. It is a society established upon a divine law, a law that emerged in its complete form from its very inception, not as a product of historical evolution. It is this law that has brought this society into existence, laying down its foundations as ordained by God, rather than as devised by men for their own ends. Under the shade of this law, the Islamic community grew. Within its framework, relationships of labour, production and governance were formed. Through its guidance, the moral and ethical codes of individuals and society were shaped. And upon its principles, the regulations of human interaction and the defining features of this unique social order were established, an order that not only sets its own course of development, but also determines the manner in which it evolves and adapts. This stands in stark contrast to the social systems that Europe has known, systems that arose through an organic but chaotic process shaped by material conditions, forged through internal struggles between classes, influenced by the friction between prevailing modes of production and emerging economic realities, and determined by the competing interests of various factions within human society. These factors in turn shaped the laws, influenced the structures of governance, and moulded the dominant social and ethical philosophies. Islamic society, however, is not the outcome of such historical contingencies. It is not the product of economic forces alone, nor the result of class conflict, nor the mere sum of shifting material interests. It is a society conceived upon a transcendent vision, a vision that integrates the material with the spiritual, the individual with the collective, and the temporal with the eternal. Its foundation is neither wealth nor power, but justice. Its ultimate aim is not the triumph of one class over another, but the establishment of harmony between all elements of human existence. Thus, the Islamic society stands apart, bearing a character all its own, neither wholly akin to any system that has preceded it, nor reducible to the frameworks devised by human intellect alone. It is a society that, when rightly understood and truly implemented, offers a path not only for the Muslim world, but for all of humanity, a path towards balance, towards dignity, and towards a civilization that does not sacrifice the soul at the altar of material progress, nor forsake the needs of the body in pursuit of transcendent ideals. That is in stark contrast to all the social systems Europe has known, systems that emerged organically in response to earthly necessities, shaped by internal class struggles, by the natural friction between existing relations of production and newly evolving modes of production, and by the conflicting interests of diverse factions within the body of human society. These forces influence the nature of laws, the structure of governments, and the prevailing social and moral ideas. Thus, all the principles and laws that apply to the genesis and evolution of Western social systems are inapplicable to Islamic society, for the origin of the latter differs fundamentally from that of those systems. It is founded upon a distinct basis, governed by a different law of growth and transformation. It was not the Islamic society that gave birth to the Sharia. Rather, it was the Sharia that gave birth to Islamic society. It was the Sharia that defined its characteristics, established its foundations, and guided and shaped its development. Unlike man-made legislation, which merely responds to transient and localized needs, the Sharia was conceived as a divine methodology for shaping all of humanity, molding it according to a specific design, and propelling it towards the realization of the ideal Islamic society. And as time passes and human knowledge advances, mankind comes ever closer to achieving that envisioned society. These distinguishing features of the Sharia have a decisive impact on the nature of Islamic society, setting it apart from all other societies that have arisen through organic evolution and have formulated their own laws in response to the limited changes that affect their daily existence. Legislation in Islamic society, the most prominent manifestation of societal evolution, as it represents a continuous response to that evolution, has always been governed by an unchanging principle, the Islamic Sharia. And although Islamic jurisprudence has continually adapted to emerging needs and evolving social relationships, its growth has never been arbitrary. It has always remained anchored to that immutable foundation, preserving the fundamental principles and essential characteristics that God intended to endure within Islamic society. Thus, the Sharia serves as a protective boundary, allowing Islamic society to grow and evolve, but only within its framework and in accordance with its enduring principles. In this way, the unique character of Islamic society remains distinct and recognizable, whereas Western societies have always had the freedom to develop according to the dictates of material circumstances, unbound by any fixed foundation. For Christianity, unlike Islam, was never a social system. It lacked a Sharia capable of structuring society according to a defined doctrine. This, in broad terms, is the fundamental principle. If historical inquiry reveals that Islamic society at times deviated from its foundational principles, swayed by foreign ideas, influenced by the social transformations of certain regions, or affected by local circumstances in certain territories that came under its fold, this should not lead us to overlook the fact that its foundational principle remained powerful enough to draw Islamic society back to its original course, imprinting upon it a unique identity, directing its pattern of growth, and bestowing upon its evolution a distinct historical trajectory. This trajectory does not conform to the social development witnessed in Europe, nor can it be explained through the same social laws that apply there, and this reality will remain unchanged in the future, for the future is not severed from the past. There is no necessity for Islamic society to tread the same path that Western societies have taken. The protective boundary of the Islamic Sharia will continue to safeguard this society, no matter how strong the forces that seek to resist it. 14 centuries of history cannot simply be erased from the consciousness of a nation, nor from the reality of its existence. One might ask, is it truly beneficial for a society's growth and development to remain tethered to an unchanging foundation, while the needs of life evolve, the forms of production diversify, and new principles and laws become necessary to accommodate these transformations? To answer this question, one must first understand the nature of that unchanging foundation, and the extent of its comprehensiveness in addressing the fundamental aspects of life. One must also undertake an objective comparison between the principles of this immutable foundation which gave rise to Islamic society and determined its path of growth and renewal, and the principles that have emerged in human history. If it becomes evident that the principles of Islam were designed, from their inception, to sustain continuity and renewal, and that they remain superior, more advanced, and more comprehensive than all other systems known to mankind, then their permanence is not a flaw, it is a virtue. For it serves as a guarantee of continuous elevation and progress, shielding society from degeneration, from the whims of fleeting desires, and from the chaos of unchecked impulses. The age of a law, whether enacted today or 100 years ago, is of no consequence if it remains ahead of the society that applies it and continues to meet its present needs with ease. Such objective comparisons between the Islamic social system and other social systems constitute the only serious and respectable approach, the only one in harmony with scientific reasoning. To reject the Islamic system solely on the grounds that it was first established 14 centuries ago without subjecting it to an objective examination, without comparing it with other systems, such a stance is unworthy of intellectual respect. It is not the approach of one who honours his own reason. Rather, it is the mechanical repetition of clichés, the unthinking mimicry of parrots. Whoever engages in a fair and objective comparison between the Islamic societal system and other social systems will readily observe that this immutable foundation is, in fact, more flexible, more adaptable, and more capable of accommodating human progress than all the so-called progressive systems of the modern age. When measured against the principles of Islam, these progressive ideologies appear backward, riddled with contradictions, deficiencies, and coercive constraints, whereas the Islamic Sharia, with its boundless flexibility and comprehensive vision, aligns itself with human nature without excess or rigidity, remaining ahead of humanity's pace even to this day. Thus, we can confidently state that it is undoubtedly beneficial for social development to have a fixed foundation to which it can return, provided that this foundation does not obstruct growth, nor impose arbitrary constraints upon the management of human affairs. As for these comparisons themselves, I shall address some of them in various sections of this study. Yet it should suffice for me to present the defining characteristics of Islamic society so that they may be readily available for comparison with those of any other society. For the characteristics of Islamic society remain unknown to the vast majority of those who, despite their ignorance, allow themselves to remain in the dark, who, despite knowing nothing of it, claim to be intellectuals. Worse still, they presume without knowledge to pass judgment between something they are familiar with and something they have never even attempted to understand, all the while pretending to engage in scientific inquiry. The immutable Islamic Sharia rests upon several defining traits that have ensured its ability to establish a society capable of growth and renewal, a society always prepared to meet the ever-changing needs of humanity. These distinguishing features are as follows. 1. It is a system devised by God, who alone knows the nature of his creation. It has therefore been established in accordance with the universal and fundamental characteristics of human nature, those intrinsic attributes that remain constant, unaffected by the passage of time, though they may evolve, expand, and assume new forms while retaining their immutable essence. In the previous discourse, I have elaborated sufficiently upon this characteristic. 2. It has been revealed in the form of general and comprehensive principles, capable of adaptation and application to the ever-changing particulars of human existence. It does not offer rigid solutions to problems which, by their very nature, are subject to perpetual renewal. Rather, it sets forth foundational guidelines that remain relevant and applicable across all conditions and circumstances. In our previous discussion on jurisprudence and the Sharia, we have explored this matter in detail. 3. These general principles encompass all aspects of human life. They address the affairs of the individual, the interrelations of the community, the foundations of the state, and international relations. They regulate every sphere of human activity, legislating for criminal, civil, commercial, social, and political matters, leaving no domain ungoverned by legal precepts. The theoretical frameworks embedded within these principles remain far superior to anything that modern legislative thought has produced. 4. The social principles upon which this system is founded are progressive, and they remain so to this day. They have propelled humanity forward and continue to possess the potential to do so again. For when measured against prevailing social structures and contemporary social theories, they remain ahead of their time, surpassing them in both scope and depth. When we delve into the fundamental components of Islamic society in detail, the truth of these assertions will become evident. But for now, let us briefly examine the characteristics of the social systems that have emerged in Europe. By doing so, we shall discern that the Islamic system is unique among them, not a mere variation of any, nor an amalgamation of several. It has neither evolved as they have, nor followed their trajectory. Its history is distinct from theirs, its origins different, its foundational principles unparalleled. Though certain superficial similarities may exist, they are purely incidental, arising by coincidence rather than by rooted continuity. Western social studies, shaped primarily by the historical experience of Europe rather than by the broader history of mankind, assert that humanity has passed through successive stages of development: primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and then socialism, leading ultimately to communism. Primitive communism, however, is nothing but a hypothesis unsupported by any compelling evidence. It is an assumption based on the imagined reconstruction of a period in human history when man had only just emerged from his animalistic existence, living in complete communal equality. During this phase, it is claimed all members of society shared in common ownership, collective labor, and the communal enjoyment of the fruits of their efforts. This phase is believed to have persisted while human subsistence depended primarily on hunting. It is said to have ended when man discovered agriculture, domesticated animals, and began herding livestock, which in turn required caretakers. It was then that tribal communities abandoned their tradition of executing captured enemies and instead enslaved them, compelling them to tend the herds and milk the cattle. Thus began the age of slavery. Unlike primitive communism, the era of slavery is a historically verifiable reality. The notion of an original communal society remains speculative, unsupported by concrete historical proof. At a certain point in history, the population of the Roman Empire was divided into two distinct classes: free citizens, who constituted roughly a quarter of the populace, and slaves, who made up the remaining three-quarters. These slaves were subjected to extreme cruelty. By day they toiled on vast estates, by night they were chained and cast into dark caverns, where they spent their restless hours under the watchful eyes of merciless guards. The punishments inflicted upon them ranged from brutal whippings to crucifixion. Beyond these torments, they were also used for the amusement of their masters, forced to engage in savage duels for the entertainment of free citizens, or to battle wild beasts in the arena, while spectators, enraptured by the spectacle, gazed on with delight. Gradually, the system of slavery began to disintegrate, giving way to feudalism as numerous slave revolts arose in response to the cruel treatment they endured, leading to a decline in agricultural productivity. Feudalism was a mode of production distinguished by a defining characteristic: perpetual servitude, serfdom. It is described as a system in which the direct producer, whether a peasant or a labourer, is bound to fulfil certain economic obligations to his feudal lord. These obligations could take the form of labour services, monetary payments, or contributions in kind. Society under feudalism was divided into two primary classes: first, the land-owning nobility, and second, the agricultural workers, including peasants, farmhands, and a dwindling number of slaves. The peasants, the direct producers, were granted the right to cultivate a portion of the land for their subsistence, engage in basic cottage industries, and provide for their families. However, in return they were obligated to fulfill numerous duties: weekly labour in the lord's fields using their own tools and livestock, additional work during harvest seasons, obligatory gifts on special occasions, and exclusive use of the lord's mills and wine presses for processing their produce. Moreover, the feudal lord exercised both judicial and administrative authority over his domain. He was responsible for governance, legal adjudication, and the protection of his subjects. Thus, the feudal order was built upon a system of mutual obligations. 2. When Islam arose, the Roman world was still dominated by a blend of slavery and feudalism. But in Arabia, where Islam was born, society was shaped by a mixture of primitive nomadism and slavery. Feudalism had not yet taken root, nor did it ever become an integral part of the Arabian social order, precisely because Islam itself prevented its emergence. It was within this historical context that Islamic principles emerged, principles that have remained unchanged to this day, principles that continue to surpass the most advanced social theories of the modern age. This in itself is irrefutable proof that the Islamic social system arose through its own intrinsic logic, under the guidance of divine law that brought it into existence and shaped its development, not through the material and economic determinants that governed the evolution of European societies. And yet, Marxists speak of European social structures as if they were universal laws of history, imposing upon them an inevitability that admits no escape. It is not natural, if indeed the theory of dialectical materialism and the notion of economic determinism were true, that a legal system should be born in an age of slavery or feudalism, and yet contain principles that transcend both these systems, encompassing elements akin to capitalism, socialism, and communism systems that were not even conceivable at that time. Moreover, within this legal framework there exist principles wholly independent of these ideologies, principles that humanity still aspires to realize and implement in its future. No human-devised law emerging in an age of slavery or feudalism could have contained within it the far-reaching vision that the Islamic law embodies regarding the future of mankind. The proof of this lies in the fact that all legal codes, social systems, and philosophical principles that were dominant in that era have long since perished. They are no longer relevant to modern life, nor do they address the evolving needs of humanity. Yet the principles of Islam alone continue to possess this unique quality, not merely for the present, but for the future as well, for many of its tenets still surpass the existing man-made systems. Thus, the notion of economic determinism collapses entirely, along with the Marxist theory of historical evolution, which assumes that social structures must necessarily progress in a predetermined sequence. Islam arose at a time when the roots of slavery were still firmly entrenched, deep and strong. It began with humanity at this lowly station, taking it by the hand and leading it toward the loftiest heights of human dignity, toward the noble ideals it enshrines. Yet, being a religion in harmony with the natural order, Islam did not attempt to leap over historical realities. The essential point to establish is that its highest principles that today surpass even the most advanced aspirations of mankind, after 14 centuries were present from the very first day. From that moment onward, Islam guided humanity along the path of progress step by step. The evolution that took place was not in Islam's principles and objectives, but rather in humanity's gradual approach toward these ideals. This alone refutes the very essence of the historical evolution theory, at least when measured against the Islamic worldview and the structure of Islamic society. Islam took mankind as it found it, binding it to its laws in a realistic manner before proceeding to lead it toward perfection. It emerged into a world where slavery was a universal system and where the enslavement of war captives was an internationally accepted norm. Islam could have abolished slavery in the Muslim society with a mere decree, just as it abolished usury. However, had it done so, it would have merely left Muslim prisoners to be enslaved by their enemies, while freeing the captives taken by the Muslims. This would have emboldened Islam's adversaries, who would then realize that if they were captured by the Muslims, they would be freed, whereas if they captured Muslims, they could keep them as slaves and concubines, in accordance with the prevailing international customs of that era. This practical reality, which Islam at its inception could not unilaterally alter, since it held no power to compel others to free their captives or to abandon the practice of enslavement, necessitated a gradual approach. Islam could not allow Muslim captives to be enslaved by disbelievers, while it unilaterally freed its own captives. Thus, out of this practical necessity, Islam laid down measures to dry up the sources of slavery in the future, so that eventually international treaties could be established prohibiting the enslavement of war captives. Islam itself did not explicitly sanction the practice, but left the matter open, stating instead, "When you have overcome them, tighten their bonds. Then either set them free as a favour or ransom them until war lays down its burdens." Quran 47:4. Yet Islam left it to the discretion of the Muslim state to act according to the exigencies of the time. Islam retained this policy as a matter of principle, out of consideration for the realities of the world at that time, before addressing the issue in practice through its liberating approach and its humanitarian directives. At a time when slaves in the Roman Empire were thrown to wild beasts for the amusement of their masters, when it was the legal right of a master to mutilate his slaves as he pleased, and when Roman law had separate provisions for the treatment of masters and slaves, at such a time, in the very heart of Arabia where Islam was born, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, peace and blessings be upon him, the noblest of the Quraysh, gave his cousin Zainab bint Jahsh in marriage to his freed slave Zayd. He appointed Usama ibn Zayd as the commander of an army set to march against the Romans, despite the presence of Abu Bakr and Umar, his closest companions and the future caliphs, among its ranks. Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian, was the mu'adhin, the caller to prayer of Islam. Salman the Persian was the Prophet's military advisor. Suhaib the Roman was among his closest companions, and Umar himself would prioritize him over Abu Sufyan in council. The Prophet, peace be upon him, declared, "Whosoever kills his slave, we shall kill him. Whosoever mutilates his slave, we shall mutilate him." In this manner, Islam practically addressed the question of slavery while seeking a realistic international resolution to the issue. In this aspect alone did Islam accommodate the realities of its time. Yet from the moment it emerged, the institution of slavery vanished from Islamic society, for its defining features and characteristics, those we have outlined, were obliterated by the ethical imperatives of Islam. Slaves, who remained within the system for a transitional period, were no longer treated as chattel, but as human beings with dignity, awaiting the day when an international treaty could be formally established. As for feudalism, with all its defining features, it never existed in the Islamic world. Islam had already blocked its path. There were at times instances of large landholdings arising from deviations in governance and economic policy from the principles laid down by Islam. Yet, despite the existence of such estates on occasion, feudalism as a system never took root. The social and economic relations of Islamic society, as well as the rights of landowners, never resembled those of feudal Europe. Thus, it can be said with certainty that Islamic civilization never passed through a feudal era, from the dawn of Islam until this very day. Likewise, when we consider Islam's position regarding the era of slavery, we find that from the moment Islam gained ascendancy, slavery no longer retained the characteristics by which it had been known in Arabian society. Islam did not establish slavery. Rather, it found it as an already existing institution and began to dry up its sources. It restricted the causes of enslavement solely to lawful warfare, thus dealing with the reality of the time, as we have previously mentioned. Moreover, Islam systematically dismantled the economic foundations of slavery by instituting the principle of social solidarity, which we shall elaborate upon later, undermined its legal structure by establishing equality among all human beings in rights, and dissolved its social barriers by eliminating distinctions between masters and slaves indeed, by elevating freedmen and entrusting them with positions of leadership. For all these reasons, we may state with confidence that Islamic society never experienced an era of slavery, nor an era of feudalism. It did not recognize their traditional characteristics at any stage in its history, nor did they constitute one of the evolutionary phases through which it passed. Following the decline of feudalism, European societies embraced a new system, the capitalist order, which emerged in relatively recent historical epochs. Its seeds were sown during the Crusades, in the 11th century CE, precisely when Europe came into contact with the social systems of Islam and was influenced by them. Having witnessed the Islamic order, Europe developed an aversion to feudalism, which had until then prevailed in its own lands. This crucial factor is often overlooked by proponents of materialist theories, for they refuse to acknowledge the role of human agency in the course of historical development, insisting instead on attributing all change solely to economic factors such as those that accompanied the Crusades and the rise of commercial cities in southern Europe. Following this materialist perspective, Dr. Rashid al-Barawi, in his book The Socialist System, summarizes the causes of feudalism's decline and capitalism's rise as follows. New productive forces emerged, proving more suitable for the advancement of society. These new productive forces could not find a broad field of activity, or even a viable one, so long as feudal relations persisted in their economic, political, and social dimensions. The Crusades provided Europe with an opportunity for commercial engagement with the East, creating vast prospects for the cities of southern Europe, particularly Venice, which secured trading privileges in the territories occupied by the Crusader forces in the East. Eastern goods began to flow into Venice, from where they were distributed across various European regions, while European exports such as woolen products, grains and wines were sent in return. Venice enjoyed a near monopoly, accumulating immense wealth among its merchants. This, in turn, spurred the merchants and cities of northern Europe, especially Lübeck, Danzig, Hamburg and Brunswick, to form a commercial alliance in defence of their interests, founding the Hanseatic League. Thus, commercial competition intensified, fostering increased trade between Europe and the East. The merchants of this league managed to secure economic privileges in key European centres, such as Bergen in Norway, Novgorod in Russia, and Brussels in the Low Countries. This burgeoning commerce played a decisive role in enhancing the economic power of the trading cities and consequently their inhabitants, the bourgeois class. Their growing wealth was not derived solely from external trade. They also exploited the financial needs of feudal lords who sought funds to sustain their wars and their ostentatious lifestyles. These merchants would lend money to the nobles at exorbitant interest rates. More significantly, many cities managed to purchase their freedom from feudal overlords, whether secular or ecclesiastical. Additionally, craftsmanship flourished and its products diversified beyond what had previously been known. Thus, artisanal industries, though of lesser significance than trade, became another source of wealth accumulation, further strengthening the bourgeoisie, which played a pivotal role in dismantling the feudal system. From our own perspective, we do not wish to disregard the economic factors outlined above. However, we see in the rigid determinism of materialist interpretations a deliberate neglect of the profound human impact of the encounters between Crusader and Muslim armies. It is undeniable that the Crusaders were deeply influenced by the free Islamic social order, an order that did not recognize the feudal dominion of lords over their vassals, as was customary in the West. The historical record clearly attests to the fact that the Crusaders were profoundly affected by what they observed in the Muslim lands. Why, then, this insistence on disregarding the role of Islam's free social structures in shaping their perceptions? In any case, history bears witness to the fact that feudalism, as it existed in Europe, as described in the preceding passages, was absent from the Islamic East, particularly in its economic and political dimensions. There existed no binding relationships between the nobility and their dependents, whether in terms of economic exchange or legal and political authority. Consequently, Islamic society did not experience the same forces that shaped European societies, nor did it tread the same historical trajectory. The birth of capitalism in Europe had no bearing on the course of Islamic civilization, nor did it influence the legislative foundations and economic systems enshrined in Islamic law systems that had been firmly established nearly 8 centuries before the emergence of capitalism in Europe. At times, certain superficial similarities may appear between aspects of the Islamic system and some features of capitalism such as private ownership, individual investment, and the right of inheritance. However, we must remember that these principles were enshrined in Islamic law centuries before the birth of capitalism. They were neither shaped by the historical forces that influenced European societies, nor contemporaneous with the theoretical underpinnings of capitalism, which emerged much later. These similarities, therefore, remain merely superficial, for Islamic society is a coherent, self-contained system independent and uninfluenced by any subsequent order. Its precedence in history naturally precludes it from having borrowed from later systems. What is crucial to remember is that while various social systems may have drawn inspiration from certain aspects of Islam since they emerged after it, it is inconceivable that Islam itself could have been influenced by them, given that it predates even the earliest of them by nearly a millennium. Furthermore, its legislative framework remains immutable, unaffected by the vicissitudes of historical evolution. Thus, we assert that these apparent resemblances are but superficial and incidental. Many are quick to point out that Islam affirms private property, individual enterprise and inheritance, and they hastily exclaim, "a capitalist system." Yet, leaving aside the fundamental differences in historical origins between the Islamic order and the capitalist order, we may briefly present some objective comparisons between the principles of both systems to reveal the superficiality of such hasty assertions. Usury and monopoly, 2 foundational pillars of capitalism, are unequivocally prohibited in Islam, as shall be explained in detail later. Likewise, the fragmentation of society into nation-states was a necessary political consequence of capitalism's emergence. This intense nationalism, in turn, gave rise to the colonial enterprise, which sought to seize raw materials and monopolize markets since, as Lenin put it, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. Islam, however, rejects extreme nationalism, embracing instead a universal outlook in which its borders are defined by ideology rather than geography. Consequently, it inherently rejects the colonial impulse to monopolize markets, aligning itself in direct opposition to the capitalist mindset. As for private ownership, personal investment and inheritance, these rest upon fundamentally different foundations in Islam than in the capitalist system. The concept of private ownership is, in essence, nothing but a social function, for the true source of all wealth is God, and the community as a whole stands as his trustee. Individuals, in turn, act as deputies of the community in the investment and utilization of wealth, yet always within the bounds set by divine law. This ownership is not absolute, nor is it free from restraints. Rather, the right of the community over wealth remains firm and unshaken. Whenever the collective need arises, wealth returns to the community in the measure required, neither exceeding nor falling short of necessity. Thus, private ownership in Islam differs fundamentally from its counterpart in the capitalist system. It is distinct in its essence, in its direction, and in its purpose. Any resemblance between the two is superficial and partial at best. The same applies to all the rights that are consequent upon private ownership. We shall expound upon all these matters in due course. For the moment, let this brief allusion suffice. These superficial and partial similarities that exist between the Islamic system and capitalism find their counterpart, if not to a greater extent, between Islam and socialism, and even communism. This alone is sufficient proof that the social order of Islam is not a mere replica of these systems, for it encompasses elements that exist separately within them, yet are found harmoniously united in Islam. Moreover, Islam precedes all these ideologies in time. They may have borrowed from it, but it has, with certainty, taken nothing from them. In any case, it is fitting that we proceed with an objective comparison first between Islam and socialism, and then, summarily, between Islam and communism, so that we may later enter into the details at the appropriate place. The capitalist system has failed to keep pace with the social transformations that have unfolded in Europe. The proponents of capitalism, particularly in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, proclaimed that it was founded upon the principle of free competition, a competition that would ensure harmony between the interests of individuals and society at large. Yet as capitalism advanced along its path of development, this competition gradually diminished in significance, giving way to monopolization, the very antithesis of competition. As for the harmony that capitalist thinkers once spoke of, it was soon replaced by stark conflict between interests. Loud voices arose in protest against this phenomenon, compelling the state to intervene more and more frequently in an attempt to mitigate the severity of these conflicts, to safeguard the well-being of the weaker and more vulnerable classes, and to provide them with a measure of security. The burden of private debt swelled immensely, its weight growing intolerable, until it became a fundamental element in modern society, an ominous force that weakens its structure and saps its resilience. On the international stage, rivalry among the great capitalist powers led to a fierce struggle over raw materials, markets, and capital investments. A struggle that inevitably culminated in conflict, as evidenced by the two world wars that erupted in the first half of the 20th century. The colonial expansion that gained momentum in the late 19th century, with all its contradictions, disputes and wars, was but a manifestation of this monopolistic evolution of capitalism. It was for these very reasons that Britain, in particular, gravitated towards socialism, just as Russia turned toward Marxism, albeit with significant practical modifications that nearly severed it from its original theoretical framework. All the principles espoused by socialism and communism were but the offspring of these historical developments. In contrast, the principles that Islam laid down in this regard are intrinsic to its very nature. They are not the product of transient social transformations. When the divine law was revealed 14 centuries ago, it came to establish a society in accordance with its precepts, not because social evolution had necessitated their emergence. Thus, whereas socialist and Marxist principles play a temporary historical role before fading into obsolescence, being the mere byproducts of social transformation, rather than its driving force, the principles of Islam remain ever operative. They transcend the fluctuating demands of any particular era or environment, for they are not the product of such demands. Rather, they have been, and shall always be, the force that propels humanity forward upon the path ordained for its perpetual ascent. Socialism does indeed converge with Islam in several aspects of economic policy. It shares with Islam, for instance, the aspiration to guarantee a dignified minimum standard of living for all individuals, encompassing employment, housing, and healthcare. It aligns with Islam in recognizing work as a fundamental right of all citizens and in rejecting the notion of absolute abolition of private ownership, while simultaneously securing public control over wealth-generating resources such as mines. It seeks, as does Islam, to bridge the gulf between various social classes, to curb wasteful extravagance, to channel surplus wealth toward the common good, and to ensure that the state possesses sufficient means to bear the burden of social welfare for the entire populace. It adopts social insurance and welfare as two essential foundations for communal solidarity. Perhaps it is this convergence that has led some Islamic thinkers themselves to fall into the misconception of speaking about Islamic socialism, the socialism of Islam, or Islamic social justice, and the like. Yet in truth, the precedence of the Islamic system precludes it from being defined by any subsequent label. This is a matter of form. As for substance, Islam constitutes a comprehensive and integrated system, in which these economic tendencies are rooted in immutable foundations, drawing sustenance from a higher, unified vision that is inseparably linked to faith in God. Socialism, on the other hand, is a materialist doctrine that concerns itself solely with the economic dimension of society, thereby rendering it partial and transient, whereas the Islamic order is holistic and enduring. It is therefore impermissible to align Islam with a system that arose as a response to a temporary necessity and whose fate is either transformation or extinction. Rather, socialism is to be measured against Islam, not the other way around. One may observe that socialism contains elements that bear resemblance to Islam, but it would be a grave error to define Islam in terms of socialism, especially when Islam preceded it by 13 centuries in the historical timeline. There remains, however, a fundamental and intrinsic distinction. Socialism, being a purely materialist economic doctrine devoid of the ethical dimensions that permeate the Islamic social order, can coexist with exploitative colonialism, such as that practiced by Britain without experiencing any internal contradiction. However, such a thing could never occur under the Islamic social order, for this order is anchored in a moral and spiritual creed that utterly rejects such exploitation. The Islamic social system is universal and humanitarian, whereas socialism is nationalistic and localized in scope. This fundamental divergence between the two systems gives rise to numerous other differences, reducing their apparent similarities to mere surface-level resemblances. As for communism, its very essence stands in stark opposition to the essence of Islam. While communism and Islam may share a common rejection of capitalist tyranny and a commitment to securing basic necessities for all individuals, as well as the principle that wealth belongs in origin to the community, yet the chasm that separates them is vast, deep, and irreconcilable. Dialectical materialism negates any influence in human affairs or in the cosmos itself, beyond the material nature of the universe. In doing so, it collides head-on, from the very first step, with the Islamic creed, which asserts that there exists a supreme will governing the universe, directing it according to a fixed and eternal law. Such is the way of God, and never shall you find in the way of God any change. The uniqueness of the Islamic creed lies in this: while it affirms the existence of the immutable law governing the universe and declares it to be unchanging and unfailing, it does not forget that this law does not exist of itself. Rather, it acknowledges the supreme will that has brought this law into being and thus explains the existence of life upon this earth. It does not evade this profound mystery, as materialist philosophies do, which find no solution to it other than turning away from it altogether. Historical materialism diminishes and sometimes outright negates the role of man in shaping life, its systems, its laws, and the social relations that govern it. Instead, it places the primary agency in the hands of the means of production. According to this theory, as Engels, Karl Marx's companion in formulating the doctrine, asserts, the ultimate causes of all fundamental changes and transformations must not be sought in the thoughts of men, nor in their pursuit of eternal truth and justice, but rather in the changes that occur in the mode of production and exchange. Islam, on the other hand, regards man as the vicegerent of God upon the earth, entrusting him with the primary role in all transformations that take place upon it. We shall elaborate on this concept in detail later, but for now it suffices to say that the Islamic perspective on man and the communist perspective leave their deep imprint upon the very essence of the respective systems. Since communism dismisses man's positive agency in this world, it implicitly belittles his worth. It concerns itself merely with securing his sustenance and physical needs, disregarding the moral value of his will, his freedom, and his emotions. Islam, however, by assigning man an active role upon the earth, allows this view to influence its legislation, granting him the dignity befitting his spirit, intellect, and will. Islam seeks to provide him not only with material necessities, but also with all that accords with human dignity, his sense of self-respect, his freedom, his familial and social relationships, his rights vis-à-vis the state, and his standing before it. Indeed, each of these two perspectives leaves its profound mark upon the way man is treated in every sphere of life. Marxism falls into grave exaggeration when it studies the social system of Europe and then proclaims that its conclusions are universally applicable, giving them the guise of scientific generalization. However, the historical reality before us refutes this claim from its very foundation. It proves, firstly, that these conclusions are merely partial, confined to a specific region of the earth, and bear no relevance whatsoever to the vast Islamic domain at any stage of its history. Secondly, it demonstrates that true scientific objectivity would have required taking into account other factors in social evolution beyond economic determinants alone. Undoubtedly, economics has its value and influence. Yet there exists within the cosmos something beyond economics' human consciousness. And there exists something beyond the machine, this human being himself. Thus we arrive at an undeniable truth. The Islamic system is neither slavery nor feudalism, nor capitalism, nor socialism, nor communism. The Islamic system is simply and exclusively Islam. The Islamic society is a universal society. It is neither racial nor national nor bound by geographical borders. Rather, it is an open society welcoming all human beings, irrespective of race, colour, language, or even religion and creed. Islam negates from the very outset all forms of racial or ethnic superiority, restoring humanity to its singular origin. It affirms that no race holds precedence over another, no lineage enjoys inherent privilege, and that differences in colour and language serve only as signs for recognition, not as markers of superiority. There exists but one criterion for excellence: piety, devotion to God, and righteous deeds among his servants, qualities that are personal and bear no connection to race or ethnicity. O mankind, behold, we have created you from a male and a female, and have made you into nations and tribes, so that you may come to know one another. Verily, the noblest among you in the sight of God is the most God-conscious. Quran 49:13. There is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab except in piety. Thus the Islamic society abolishes racial discrimination at its very roots. It opens its doors to all humanity on a foundation of absolute equality and pure human brotherhood. Nothing is more alien to the Islamic ethos than the kind of fanaticism that stirs racial arrogance, whether in the manner of the Nazis or of the Jews, or the kind of colour-based prejudice seen in the treatment of Native Americans and black people in the United States, or in the policies of apartheid in South Africa. For this reason, all races, colours and languages can gather under the shade of Islam and within its social system, united by a single bond, the bond of humanity itself. This bond does not distinguish between black and white, nor between north and south, nor between east and west, for they all converge upon the grand universal tie. O mankind, be conscious of your sustainer, who has created you out of one living entity, and out of it created its mate, and from the two spread abroad a multitude of men and women. Quran 4:1. He is not of us who calls to tribalism. He is not of us who fights for tribalism. He is not of us who dies for tribalism. Just as Islam removes barriers of race, colour and language, it also transcends geographical boundaries, those artificial demarcations that divide the peoples of the earth, fostering intense nationalism and thus leading to dangerous rivalries among nations. In the end, this unchecked nationalism culminates in colonial competition, which, in its essence, is the exploitation of one nation by another, one race by another, one land by another. It is evident that the initial cause of colonial struggles in the modern era was precisely this sharp sense of nationalism, which drew distinctions based on territorial borders. Each state sought to secure for its isolated nation a vital space to obtain raw materials, human resources, and markets for its surplus goods and products. It is equally evident that all modern wars have been waged upon this premise, and that the greatest evil to afflict mankind in the past two world wars and the looming catastrophe that threatens in the next has arisen from this intense nationalist sentiment, from the weakness of the global and humanitarian spirit. Indeed, Marxism, in its materialist interpretation of history and its economic determinism, attributes the phenomenon of colonialism solely to capitalism, asserting that colonialism represents the highest stage of capitalism. It further proclaims that colonialism inevitably leads to war. Yet one who liberates himself from this rigid perspective where life is forced to conform to a particular theory rather than allowing the theory to emerge from the realities of life will see that capitalism alone is insufficient to give rise to colonialism. If nations were not bound by the narrow creed of nationalism, capitalism would have been capable only of creating class exploitation, one class oppressing another. However, this is a different reality altogether from the colonial system we know, which in its essence is the exploitation of one land, its resources and its people for the benefit of another, merely because they are shielded beneath different national banners. Marxism's claim that colonialism is the highest stage of capitalism is a conclusion drawn from a world dominated by nationalistic fervour rather than the spirit of universal brotherhood. The Islamic system dismantles the colonial order by shattering the foundations of nationalism. As for class exploitation, Islam eradicates it through different means, ones that shall be discussed in their proper place. Islam does not recognize territorial boundaries, just as it does not recognize racial or ethnic distinctions. The earth belongs entirely to God, and He created it with all that is within it for His human creation. And mention, O Muhammad, when your sustainer said to the angels, "Indeed, I will make upon the earth a vicegerent." Quran 2:30. All of humanity has been entrusted with the stewardship of this earth to cultivate it, to develop it, and to make use of its treasures. Humanity is one brotherhood. They shall not obtain God's mercy unless they show mercy to one another, cooperating in righteousness and good works. The Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Show mercy to those on earth, and He who is in the heavens will show mercy to you." He made no distinction between races or nations, not even between Muslims and non-Muslims. Thus, colonialism and colonial wars have no place in Islamic thought, for Islam views all of humanity as a single nation. There is no meaning in the exploitation of one race for the benefit of another, or one homeland for the advantage of another. Such an idea appears either absurd or repugnant from an Islamic perspective. We shall later see that the wars undertaken by Islam had causes distinct from these. When Islam abolishes the geographical and racial barriers upon which the concept of the national homeland is built, it does not, however, nullify the notion of homeland altogether. Rather, it preserves its noble meaning, the meaning of unity, fraternity, cooperation and order, the meaning of a shared purpose that binds a community together. Islam transforms the homeland into a sentiment within the heart rather than a mere expanse of land. Under this sentiment, people from all races, colours and lands come together as members of a single homeland, as brothers in faith, as partners in the pursuit of the common good for themselves and for all humanity. This sentiment is none other than Islam itself. Indeed, the believers are but brothers. Quran 49:10. The believer to another believer is like a building, each part strengthening the other. The example of the believers in their mutual love, mercy and compassion is like a single body. When one part of it suffers, the rest of the body responds with sleeplessness and fever. Thus, Islam's vision of community serves as a substitute for the concept of homeland, preserving its noble essence while eliminating its darker implications. It does not engender the desire to exploit one land for the sake of another, nor to subjugate one group of people for the benefit of another. Instead, it nurtures the conviction that every land under the shade of Islam belongs to all, and that every Muslim upon the face of the earth is a citizen of the global Muslim community. Undoubtedly, competition over an idea does not give rise to the evils that emerge from competition over material interests. Likewise, the desire to spread a message does not generate the same harm as the desire to expand power for the sake of exploitation, the exploitation they call colonialism. At this point, a question arises: does Islam merely replace one form of chauvinism with another? Does it demolish racial and national fanaticism only to erect religious fanaticism in their place? One that may prove even more perilous to human brotherhood than racial or national bigotry. Has not humanity tasted the bitterness of religious fanaticism, both in the Crusades of old and in the massacres of India in modern times, suffering calamities no less severe than those caused by racial and colonial wars? Those who do not truly understand Islam may have some justification for raising this question, especially Westerners, whose perception of Islam has been distorted by the legacy of the Crusades, a perception that has never been fully corrected. For this reason, the matter deserves some clarification. Islam presents itself as a universal message addressed to all of humanity. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was not sent as a messenger to the Quraysh alone, nor to the Arabs of the peninsula, nor even to the Semitic peoples, as Jesus, peace be upon him, was sent to guide the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Rather, he was sent to all the peoples of the earth. And we have not sent you except comprehensively to mankind, as a bringer of glad tidings and a warner. Quran 34:28. Islam views itself as a source of goodness, blessing and mercy for all of humanity, and we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to the worlds. Quran 21:107. Indeed, this Quran guides to that which is most upright. Quran 17:9. Islam, in its universal outlook, desires that all of humanity should partake in its goodness, its mercy, and its guidance. It does not wish for these blessings to be confined to a particular people or race, as is the case with Judaism, for instance. Yet, at the same time, it does not seek to compel people into its fold. There is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from falsehood. Quran 2:256. All that Islam asks is the freedom to convey its message to all the inhabitants of the earth, so that they may receive the absolute good it brings, good that it does not reserve for any particular race or nation. It asks that its followers be granted the freedom to practice their faith, that they not be coerced into abandoning it, nor subjected to harm in their persons or property. It seeks to ensure that it possesses the strength necessary to protect them from such persecution, to implement its laws among them, for no legal system can function without the necessary authority to uphold it. Every social order requires not only moral discipline, but also the institutional power needed to enforce its structure. From this necessity arises the Islamic concept of fraternity, which transcends race, homeland, lineage, and blood ties. You will not find a people who believe in God and the last day loving those who oppose God and his messenger, even if they were their fathers or their sons or their brothers or their kindred. Quran 58:22. Say, if your fathers, your sons, your brothers, your spouses, your kindred, the wealth you have acquired, the commerce you fear may decline, or the dwellings you cherish are dearer to you than God and his messenger and striving in his cause, then wait until God executes his decree, and God does not guide the defiantly disobedient. Quran 9:24. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Among God's servants are those who are neither prophets nor martyrs, yet the prophets and martyrs will envy them on the day of judgment for their closeness to God." The people asked, "O messenger of God, who are they?" He replied, "They are those who love one another for the sake of God, without ties of kinship or material interests. By God their faces will shine with light, and they will be upon light. They shall not fear when others fear, nor shall they grieve when others grieve." Yet the mission entrusted by God to the Muslim community is not merely to guide humanity toward the goodness that Islam has brought, nor solely to safeguard the Islamic creed and its adherents. Indeed, it is far greater and more encompassing than that. It is also to ensure the protection of worship and belief for all people, to remove material force from the domain of faith and conviction, to shield the weak from the oppression of the strong, to repel injustice wherever it may arise and upon whomever it may fall, and to guarantee equity and justice for all of humankind. It is to combat corruption and evil in the world as part of the noble trusteeship that God has charged this nation with, as he declares, "You are the best nation ever brought forth for mankind. You enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong, and you believe in God." Quran 3, 110. "Thus have we made you a middle nation, so that you may bear witness over mankind, and the messenger may be a witness over you." Quran 2, 143. Thus we see that the mission entrusted to the Muslims and the burdens they must bear in fulfilling it require them to stand in absolute solidarity, bound together not by ties of race, homeland, blood, or lineage, but by the vision that unites them, a vision that transcends all such affiliations and imposes upon them a duty far greater than these ties combined. There is an Islamic sense of solidarity, but it is one that is defined within these parameters and guided by these principles. It is a solidarity of mutual commitment among all Muslims in unwavering devotion to an idea, a solidarity of cooperation in carrying this idea's message of goodness to the whole of humankind, a goodness they themselves have experienced in their own lives and from which they have reaped great benefit. It is a solidarity that seeks to convey this message to others through gentle persuasion, as the Quran commands, "Call unto the way of your sustainer with wisdom and fair exhortation, and argue with them in the best of manners." Quran 16, 125. It is also a solidarity that seeks to remove arbitrary barriers to this call, including the suppression imposed by states that prohibit their citizens by force from even listening to Islam's message, or that prevent Muslim preachers from spreading their call. And even more fundamentally, it is a solidarity that protects Muslims from aggression and preserves the Islamic social order from being overturned by brute force. Ultimately, it is a solidarity that strives to establish social justice across the entire world, and to combat injustice in any of its manifestations, regardless of whether the victim is a Muslim or a non-Muslim, whether the wrong is inflicted upon an individual or an entire nation. For as we have stated, the Muslim community is entrusted with the duty of repelling injustice on behalf of all humanity, in a spirit of universal human compassion, not in the narrow-minded spirit of sectarian zealotry. This is in fulfillment of the mercy for all creation that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was sent with, and of the universal trusteeship that God has conferred upon the Muslims. It is not a solidarity based on enmity towards other races, for the Muslim nation itself is composed of all races, nor is it a solidarity based on hostility toward followers of other religions merely because they do not embrace Islam. Rather, it is a solidarity of goodwill and benevolence, aspiring to draw all of humanity toward a shared goodness without compulsion, and a solidarity of justice, seeking to uphold absolute fairness for every individual, every people, and every race. Even if they choose to remain upon their own religions after hearing Islam's message, their humanity alone obligates the Muslim community to defend them from oppression in all its forms, and to shield them from corruption in any guise. It was for these purposes alone that Islam permitted warfare that sprang from the very spirit of Islam. And if, on certain occasions, some Muslim groups waged war for motives other than these lofty aims, if economic exploitation, forced conversions, or any other element crept into their campaigns, then such actions were deviations from the ideals and objectives of Islam. Islam does not approve of them, nor do its true followers. Indeed, such instances were rare in the history of the Muslims. Let us now reflect upon a few verses from the Quran and sayings of the Prophet to elucidate these principles further. Islam never intended to spread its message through coercion or force in any form. Even miraculous compulsion, whereby people would be compelled to believe upon witnessing supernatural signs, was not employed by Islam, as had been the case with earlier religions such as the 9 miracles of Moses, or the speaking of Jesus in the cradle, or his raising of the dead and healing of the blind and leprous. Islam chose instead to appeal directly to human reason and perception, inviting people to embrace its creed and law through intellectual conviction, in accordance with its overarching philosophy of honouring and dignifying mankind. Consequently, Islam also refrained, all the more so, from employing material force as a means of persuasion or conversion. It did not view divergence in belief as a flaw to be eradicated, but rather as a natural necessity, an inherent aspect of human nature, and a manifestation of the divine will in the unfolding of life and history. Had your sustainer so willed, he could have made all humankind one single community, but they will never cease to differ save those upon whom your sustainer has bestowed his mercy, and for this he has created them. Quran 11, 118, 119. Had God so willed, he could have made you all one single community, but he has willed that he test you through that which he has given you. So vie then with one another in good works. Quran 5:48. To temper the Prophet's ardent desire to bring people into Islam and to moderate the fervour of the Muslims in seeking this goal, the Quran affirms that God's decree has never ordained that all people should become believers, and that no one may be coerced into Islam. Had your sustainer so willed, all those who are on earth would have believed. Will you then compel people until they become believers? Quran 10:99. There is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands clear from falsehood. Quran 2:256. Thus, the Muslims' objective is not to force anyone into embracing Islam. Rather, their sole aim is that they be granted the freedom to call to their faith, and that people be left free to choose their own belief. Once truth has been made clear from falsehood, the choice remains with humanity, and compulsion is categorically forbidden by the divine law. As for warfare, it was sanctioned for an entirely different purpose, namely, to defend the freedom of Muslims who had suffered persecution for their faith, and who were expelled from their homes for no reason other than proclaiming, "Our sustainer is God." The Quran declares, "Permission has been granted to those who are being fought against, because they have been wronged. And verily, God is able to grant them victory, those who have been driven from their homes without just cause, merely for saying, 'Our sustainer is God.'" And were it not for God's repelling some people by means of others, monasteries, churches, synagogues and mosques, wherein God's name is much invoked, would surely have been demolished. And indeed, God will surely aid those who aid his cause. Verily, God is all-powerful, almighty. Those who, if we establish them in the land, uphold prayer, give alms, enjoin what is right, and forbid what is wrong. And unto God belongs the ultimate consequence of all affairs. Quran 22:39-41. And though this passage reveals the immediate reason for granting Muslims permission to fight, its continuation sets forth a general ruling on the legitimacy of combat and the divine purpose behind aiding those who uphold his cause. That purpose is none other than the safeguarding of freedom of belief both for Muslims and non-Muslims alike, and the establishment of goodness and righteousness upon the earth. For the verse declares that, were it not for the resistance of some people, namely, the believers against others, namely, the oppressors, then surely monasteries, churches, synagogues and mosques would have been destroyed. The term monasteries refers to the places of worship of monks, churches to the places of worship of Christians, synagogues to the places of worship of Jews, and mosques to the places of worship of Muslims. Notably, the passage presents the places of worship of other faiths before mentioning mosques, thereby underscoring the necessity of defending them from aggression. Thus, it is a call to uphold the freedom of worship for all, and to respect all houses of devotion. Following this, the verse promises victory to those who enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong, worship God with sincerity, and spend their wealth in aid of the needy and destitute. Islam does not seek freedom of worship for its adherents alone. Rather, it affirms this right for those of all faiths and enjoins upon Muslims the duty of defending this right for everyone. It grants them permission to wage war under this noble banner, the banner of ensuring freedom of worship for all religious communities. In doing so, Islam establishes itself as a universal order of justice, under which all people may dwell in safety, enjoying their religious freedoms on equal footing with Muslims and under their protection. Yet even with this permission to fight in pursuit of such a lofty aim, Muslims have been commanded never to transgress. Clear conditions have been set regarding when combat is permissible for this cause and when it is not. They are bound to fight only those who wage war against them and those who seek to turn believers away from their faith, such persecution being graver in the sight of God than killing itself, for it constitutes an assault on the most precious possession of a human being, the freedom of conscience. Moreover, they have been prohibited from aggression and from initiating hostilities against their foes in places and times where war is forbidden, unless their enemies first attack them. And fight in God's cause against those who wage war against you, but do not commit aggression, for indeed God does not love aggressors. And slay them wherever you may come upon them, and drive them away from wherever they drove you away, for oppression is worse than killing. But do not fight them near the sacred mosque unless they fight you there first, but if they do so, then slay them, for such is the recompense of those who deny the truth. Yet if they desist, then behold, God is much forgiving, a dispenser of grace. And fight them until there is no more oppression, and all worship is devoted to God alone. But if they desist, then let there be no hostility except against those who oppress. The sacred month is to be honoured in return for the sacred month, and all sanctities demand retribution. Thus, if anyone transgresses against you, respond with force equal to their aggression, but remain conscious of God, and know that God is with those who are mindful of him. 2, 190, 194. Here, too, we find that the purpose of warfare in Islam is solely to repel aggression without transgression, to avert persecution in matters of faith, and to ensure that religion is left to God alone. The fundamental principle remains: there is to be no war except against those who wage war and against tyrants who unjustly bar people from their faith. No hostility is to be shown except against those who oppress. There is yet another category of adversaries whom Islam permits Muslims to fight preventively: those who repeatedly break their peace treaties with the Muslims, violating their pacts time and again, such that Muslims are left in constant fear for their safety. Against such treacherous foes, Muslims are commanded to declare the annulment of any existing treaties, yet even against these Muslims have no legitimate grounds for hostility if they incline toward peace and choose the path of reconciliation. Behold, the worst creatures in the sight of God are those who deny the truth and will not believe those with whom you have made a covenant. Yet they break their covenant time and again, having no fear of God. So if you find them in battle, make an example of them to deter those who follow them, so that they may take heed. And if you have reason to fear treachery from a people, then openly declare the dissolution of your treaty with them, so that both sides are on equal terms, for, verily, God does not love the treacherous. And let not those who deny the truth think they have outpaced God; they shall never elude him. And prepare against them whatever strength you can muster, including war mounts, so that you may strike fear into the hearts of the enemies of God and your own enemies, as well as others whom you do not know but whom God knows. And whatever you spend in God's cause shall be repaid to you in full, and you shall not be wronged. But if they incline toward peace, then incline toward it as well, and place your trust in God, for verily he alone is all-hearing, all-knowing. And should they seek to deceive you, then surely God is sufficient for you. He it is who has strengthened you with his help and with the believers. 8:55-62. Yet another banner under which Islam permits combat is the banner of defending the weak against oppression, against all forms of tyranny and injustice, so that God's law of justice may be upheld, with no worldly aim other than the fulfillment of his command. Let those who sell the life of this world for the hereafter fight in God's cause, and whoever fights in God's cause, whether slain or victorious, we shall grant him a mighty reward. And what is it that holds you back from fighting in the cause of God and in defense of the oppressed men, women, and children who cry out, "O our Sustainer, lead us forth from this land whose people are oppressors, and raise for us out of your grace a protector, and raise for us a helper"? Those who believe fight in the cause of God, whereas those who deny the truth fight in the cause of falsehood. Fight then against the allies of Satan, for indeed Satan's guile is weak. 4:74-76. Thus, war in Islam is waged against tyranny and oppression, not to force belief upon others, nor out of hatred towards those who follow a different creed. It is, rather, the practical means by which injustice is repelled, justice is established, security is ensured, and the weak are protected. Beyond these purposes, Islam grants no merit to warfare, nor does it accept any form of jihad that is not waged in his cause. A man once came to the Prophet and asked, "A man may fight for the spoils of war. Another may fight for display, who then is truly fighting in the cause of God?" The Prophet replied, "He who fights so that the word of God may be supreme is the one who fights in the cause of God." Bukhari and Muslim. And the word of God is none other than the establishment of truth, the repelling of oppression, and the safeguarding of freedom of belief, as we have elucidated. Finally, to dispel the misconception of Islamic fanaticism, let us reflect on certain verses that are often misinterpreted. "Verily, the only true religion in the sight of God is self-surrender unto him." 3:19. "And whoever seeks a religion other than self-surrender unto God, it shall never be accepted from him." 3:85. Islam, as the universal faith, has embraced all previous revelations and affirmed the unity of God, the unity of belief, and the unity of the divine message. Every prophet was sent with the same essential faith: surrender to God alone. Thus, all who submitted to God in sincerity before the advent of a new revelation lived and died as followers of the one true religion, Islam. What is the intended meaning of the word Islam in these two verses? Indeed, Islam, in keeping with its universal nature, has embraced all the messages and religions that came before it. It has affirmed not only the unity of God, but also the unity of faith and the unity of the divine message with which all the messengers were sent. For all messengers came with one religion: Islam, the surrender of the heart to God alone, without partner. This is the immutable foundation of faith. However, the laws that regulate the life of society have evolved within the divine messages through the hands of the messengers in accordance with the needs of humanity and the degree of its growth and understanding. Thus, when Islam came in its final form through the message of Muhammad, peace be upon him, it encompassed the essential truth of God's singular religion. It preserved what was righteous in the principles, laws, and systems of previous revelations, completed what was lacking, and perfected it. "This day have I perfected for you your religion, and completed my favour upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your way of life." Quran 5:3. Therefore, whoever passed away in submission to God, regardless of their religious affiliation before the arrival of the next dispensation, died in a state of Islam, and God accepted their surrender unto him. Their deeds, whether good or ill, are left to God's judgment. Nay, but whoever surrenders his whole being unto God, and is a doer of good, shall have his reward with his sustainer, and no fear need they have, and neither shall they grieve. Quran 2:112. Verily, those who have attained to faith, and those who follow the Jewish faith, and the Christians, and the Sabians, whoever believes in God, and the last day, and does righteousness, shall have their reward with their sustainer. And no fear need they have, and neither shall they grieve. Quran 2:62. But after the message of Muhammad, peace be upon him, the final and complete form of divine guidance, religion became Islam in its ultimate manifestation, confirming the truth of whatever there still remained of earlier revelations and determining what is true therein. Quran 5:48. Thus it gathered within itself the eternal principles of all previous revelations, and so whoever seeks a way other than Islam shall not have it accepted from him. And he who seeks a way of life other than Islam, it will never be accepted from him, and in the hereafter he shall be among the losers. Quran 3:85. However, acceptance or rejection is solely a matter between the Creator and his servant. This in no way implies coercion, forcing others into Islam. Rather, it is a message of clarity from God, an admonition urging people to hasten toward his way as he willed it, and not to cling to forms of faith whose time has passed and whose function has been fulfilled. If they desire to obey God and seek his pleasure, let them embrace his final guidance. But if they turn away, their matter rests with God alone. Say, O people of the book, come to a word that is equitable between us and you, that we shall worship none but God, and that we shall not ascribe divinity to anything beside him, and that we shall not take one another as lords beside God. And if they turn away, then say, bear witness that we have surrendered ourselves unto him. Quran 3:64. It is appropriate here to present some passages that affirm the unity of faith and demonstrate that every true religion has always been Islam in one of its divinely ordained forms. For these verses reveal to us the universal nature of Islam, its embrace of all preceding heavenly messages, its respect for their prophets and followers, its love for the believers among them, and its tolerance even towards those who do not accept it, so long as they do not oppose it with hostility or seek to extinguish its light. In Surah Al-Araf, the accounts of Noah, Hud, and Salih appear side by side, and in each of their calls to their people, a singular message is echoed, one that has resounded since the dawn of revelation. Indeed, we sent Noah to his people, and he said, O my people, worship God, you have no God but him. Quran 7:59. And unto the people of Ad we sent their brother Hud, who said, O my people, worship God, you have no God but him. Quran 7:65. And unto the people of Tamud we sent their brother Salih, who said, O my people, worship God, you have no God but him. Quran 7:73. In Surah Al-Baqarah, we find the supplication of Abraham and Ishmael while raising the foundations of the sacred house. Our Sustainer, make of us those who surrender themselves unto you, and of our offspring a community that surrenders itself unto you. The Quran 2:128. And again, the Quran recounts the words spoken about Abraham, Jacob, and the prophetic lineage. And who would turn away from the way of Abraham but the one who is devoid of reason? Indeed, we chose him in this world, and in the hereafter he shall be among the righteous. When his Sustainer said to him, Surrender, he said, I have surrendered myself to the Sustainer of all worlds. And this did Abraham enjoin upon his children, as did Jacob. O my sons, indeed God has chosen for you this way of life, so do not die except in a state of surrender unto him. Quran 2:130-132. Were you present when death approached Jacob, when he said to his sons, What will you worship after me? They said, We shall worship your God, the God of your forefathers, Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac, the one God, and unto him we surrender. Quran 2:133. Thus it becomes manifest that all the messengers came with a single message, the worship of God alone, without any partners. This is Islam in its universal meaning. And on this foundation, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants were all Muslims in their devotion to their Sustainer. Given this overarching truth, Muslims believe in all the prophets, making no distinction between them, nor do they bear enmity toward their religions or their followers. All they ask is that others likewise acknowledge the message of Muhammad, peace be upon him, which confirms and upholds what was revealed before him. If they do not, then their choice is theirs alone. Let them not, however, hinder the Muslims from proclaiming the divine message to the world. He has ordained for you the way of faith, which he enjoined upon Noah, and that which we have revealed unto you, O Muhammad, and that which we enjoined upon Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, that you should uphold the faith and not be divided therein. Quran 42:13. Say, we believe in God and in that which has been revealed to us, and that which was revealed to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, and that which was given to Moses and Jesus, and that which was given to the prophets from their Sustainer. We make no distinction between any of them, and unto him we have surrendered ourselves. Quran 2, 136. If then they believe as you believe, they have found guidance, but if they turn away, they are in contentious opposition. Yet God will suffice you against them, for he is all-hearing, all-knowing. Quran 2, 137. Thus, in accordance with its vision of religious plurality and its universal mission, Islam does not sever ties with those who do not follow it so long as they do not wage war against it, obstruct its message, spread corruption, or oppress the weak. Rather, it grants full dignity and rights to those who live within its realm and extends to all humanity the opportunity for cooperation in righteousness and virtue. As for those who dwell under the protection of the Islamic State, they are the dhimmis, those to whom Islam has extended its covenant of security, ensuring their safety from external aggression and guaranteeing, within the realm of the state, the inviolability of their lives, property, and beliefs. Their places of worship are safeguarded, and they are granted the freedom to engage in social and economic activities, so long as these do not disrupt the order of society or undermine its established moral foundations. All of this is in return for the payment of the jizya tax to the Islamic government. Much has been said, often in ignorance or with deliberate malice, regarding the jizya. Many have sought to exploit it as a means of casting aspersions upon Islam. Yet in truth Islam has imposed zakat upon every Muslim who possesses wealth exceeding the equivalent of 12 gold coins in today's currency. Moreover, Islam has obligated jihad, the tax of blood, upon every able-bodied Muslim, requiring them to defend the Islamic vision and to stand against oppression and tyranny, not merely for themselves but for all people, including the dhimmis. However, since zakat and jihad are acts of worship specific to the Islamic creed, burdens of both wealth and life itself, Islam has not compelled the dhimmis to partake in them, for they do not share the faith that mandates these obligations. Instead, in place of the tax of wealth and the tax of blood, Islam has levied the jizya upon them, a purely financial obligation devoid of any religious connotation. It is also important to note that while zakat is required of both Muslim men and women, and even upon the wealth of minors to be paid by their guardians, jizya is imposed only upon men, excluding women and children. Furthermore, jizya is generally fixed within 3 categories, whereas zakat fluctuates in accordance with one's financial standing without any upper limit. The standard rates of jizya were 48 dirhams per year for the wealthy, 24 dirhams for those of moderate means, and 12 dirhams for craftsmen and labourers. It was never imposed upon the destitute, those who relied on charity, the blind who lacked a trade, the physically disabled, nor upon monks residing in monasteries unless they possessed personal wealth. Likewise, hermits and ascetics were also exempt. And the dhimmi does not merely pay the jizya in exchange for external and internal protection, he also benefits from the social welfare system that Islam mandates for those unable to earn a livelihood, whether they be children, the sick, the elderly, or the infirm. Islam guarantees for them all that is necessary for their sustenance, regardless of their ethnicity or skin colour, and irrespective of their religious affiliation. The historical precedents of Islam affirm this noble humanitarian principle. It is narrated that Umar ibn al-Khattab, may God be pleased with him, once saw an elderly blind man begging at the door of a house. He inquired about his condition and was told that the man was a Jew. Umar asked him, "What has brought you to this state?" The man replied, "I beg for the payment of jizya, for I am in need, and old age has overtaken me." Umar took him by the hand, led him to his own home, and provided him with sustenance. Then he sent word to the treasurer of the public treasury, instructing him, "Look after this man and others like him. By God, we have not done justice if we have taken jizya from him in his youth, only to abandon him in his old age. Indeed, alms are for the poor and the needy." Quran 9:60. And this man is among the needy of the people of the book. On another occasion, while travelling to Damascus, Umar passed by a community of Christian lepers. He ordered that they be provided for from the public treasury and that their sustenance be ensured. Thus, more than 13 centuries ago, Islam elevated human dignity to such sublime heights, instituting social welfare as a fundamental human right, unbound by creed or religion, unaffected by theological differences. History further records that on certain occasions, Muslims even returned the jizya they had collected when they found themselves unable to fulfill their obligation of protection. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, may God be pleased with him, returned the jizya to the people of Syria when he learned that the Roman Empire had amassed an army against him. He wrote to the governors of the cities that had entered into treaty agreements with the Muslims, instructing them to return to the people whatever had been collected from them, and to inform them, "We return to you your wealth because we have received news of an enemy force gathering against us. Since you stipulated in our agreement that we would protect you, and we are now unable to do so, we return to you what we have taken. We remain bound by the conditions we established together, and if God grants us victory over them, we shall once again honour our covenant." But those who seek to assail Islam latch onto a particular Quranic verse, believing it to be an irrefutable argument against its justice and a dagger against its integrity. Fight those who do not believe in God or in the last day, who do not forbid what God and his messenger have forbidden, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from among the people of the book until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Quran 9:29. Yet, within this very verse lies its own answer. It specifically refers to those among the people of the book who do not believe in God or in the last day, who do not forbid what God and his messenger have forbidden, and who do not adopt the religion of truth. This description categorically defines them as disbelievers, regardless of their nominal association with the people of the book. For is there anyone who denies God and the last day, yet still retains the essence of being a Christian or a Jew? Thus, the command to fight them is, in reality, a command to fight those who are, in truth, unbelievers, regardless of the outward label of their religious identity. And as per the Islamic doctrine of war and peace, whose principles shall be discussed shortly, such people are fought only when they engage in aggression. Even so, Islam extends them the courtesy of being treated as people of the book based on outward appearances, allowing them the option to pay jizya in exchange for peace. This is a concession Islam does not extend to outright polytheists. The purpose of jizya is explicitly stated in the verse. It serves as an acknowledgement of submission to peace, a renunciation of hostilities, and an assurance of religious freedom. It is a just recompense for their previous aggression, their suppression of the Islamic call, and their persecution of its followers. Thus, we see that jizya is not the oppressive, exploitative tax that some detractors of Islam attempt to portray. Indeed, we hesitate even to compare it with the war reparations imposed by the victorious powers of the 20th century, for such comparisons are futile. The systems and conduct of the Western world are no standard by which to judge Islam. The moral descent of modern civilization cannot serve as a justification for the principles of Islam, which soar far above such worldly considerations. Likewise, just as Islam exempts the dhimmis from religious obligations such as zakat and jihad, it also grants them economic freedoms within the Islamic society. It permits them to engage in transactions that are forbidden to Muslims. For instance, while Islam prohibits Muslims from consuming, owning or trading in alcohol and pork, deeming them unworthy of legal financial consideration, such restrictions do not apply to the dhimmis. If a Muslim's alcohol or pork is stolen, the thief is not punished, nor is compensation due. However, if these goods belong to a dhimmi, their theft is penalized and compensation is required, for Islam preserves their rights without imposing its creed upon them. Islam does not merely safeguard the lives of the dhimmis, as the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, declares, "Whoever kills a person under covenant shall not even smell the fragrance of paradise." 1. Nor does it simply protect their wealth and freedoms, as he also said, Whoever wrongs a person under covenant, burdens him beyond his capacity, or takes from him something without his consent, I shall be his opponent on the day of judgment. 2. Yet Islam does not leave them in social isolation, content merely with securing their lives, wealth and liberties. No, rather, it grants them a place in its embrace amongst its people to live as honoured citizens, bound together with Muslims by ties of affection, social exchange and mutual courtesies. They are not segregated into separate quarters, nor are they confined to particular occupations, nor are they forbidden from mingling with Muslims, as happens with the segregation of whites and blacks in America, or the treatment of people of colour in South Africa. Indeed, under Islam, dhimmis are befriended and shown kindness. They live in an open social atmosphere where they invite Muslims to their feasts, and Muslims invite them to theirs, fostering a gentle and cordial social bond. This day all good foods have been made lawful, and the food of those who are given the Scripture is lawful for you, and your food is lawful for them. 3. It is fitting here to recount an incident from the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, which is particularly telling of the sentiments that stirred the hearts of the first Muslims toward the dhimmis. Jabir ibn Abdullah narrated, "A funeral procession passed by, and the Prophet stood up. So we stood with him. We said, 'O Messenger of God, it is the funeral of a Jew.' He replied, 'Is it not a human soul? If you see a funeral, then stand.' For such is the sentiment free of all traces of bigotry, even religious bigotry. Such is the lofty Islamic horizon, beyond the reach of those who aspire to it. Before I conclude this discussion, I wish to present some passages from the words of a European Christian regarding Islam's stance on this matter. In his book The Preaching of Islam, Sir T.W. Arnold, as translated by Ibrahim Hassan and his colleague, writes on page 54, "When Damascus set an example by concluding a peace treaty with the Arabs in the year 637 CE, thereby securing itself from pillage and plunder, while also obtaining other favourable conditions, the rest of the cities of Syria were quick to follow suit. Homs, Manbij and several other cities entered into similar treaties, thereby coming under Arab rule. Even the Patriarch of Jerusalem surrendered the city under similar terms. The fear that the Byzantine emperor who had deviated from the faith might coerce them into following his creed made the Muslim promise of religious freedom more appealing than their previous allegiance to the Byzantine state or any other Christian government. And no sooner had their initial fears of an invading army dissipated than they were overtaken by a fervent enthusiasm for the victorious Arabs. As for the provinces of the Byzantine Empire that swiftly fell to the valour of the Muslims, they found themselves enjoying a degree of religious tolerance unknown for centuries, owing to the theological disputes between the Jacobites and Nestorians. They were permitted to practice their faith without interference, except for certain restrictions aimed at preventing any friction between followers of competing religions or any form of religious ostentation that might provoke Muslim sensibilities. The extent of this remarkable tolerance, so striking in the history of the 7th century, can be gauged from the treaties granted by the Arabs to the cities they conquered, wherein they pledged to protect the lives, properties and religious freedoms of the inhabitants in return for their submission and the payment of the jizya. And on page 58 he writes, "The purpose of levying this tax upon Christians was not, as some scholars erroneously claim, a form of punishment for their refusal to embrace Islam. Rather, they paid it alongside all other non-Muslim subjects of the state, for their religious beliefs prevented them from serving in the army. In return, they were granted the protection ensured by the swords of the Muslims. When the people of Al-Hira paid the agreed sum, they explicitly stated that they did so on the condition that you will protect us and our leader from oppression, whether from Muslims or others. Similarly, in the treaty that Khalid ibn al-Walid concluded with some towns near Al-Hira, he stated, 'If we protect you, then we deserve the jizya, otherwise you owe us nothing.' He then recounts the incident involving Abu Ubaidah, which we have already mentioned, and continues, The jizya was imposed, as we have mentioned, only upon able-bodied men in exchange for the military service they would otherwise have been required to perform had they been Muslims. It is evident that any Christian community was exempted from this tax if it participated in military service alongside the Muslims. This was the case with the Harajima, a Christian tribe residing near Antioch, who made peace with the Muslims and pledged to support them in their military campaigns, on the condition that they would not be required to pay the jizya and would receive a share of the spoils. When the Muslim conquests advanced toward northern Persia in the year 22 AH, a similar agreement was reached with a tribe on the borderlands of that region, relieving them of the jizya in exchange for military service. This Christian scholar continues to cite examples from later periods until he states, on page 59, moreover, Egyptian peasants were exempted from military service, even though they were Muslim, and in return they were required to pay the jizya, just as it was imposed upon Christians. 5. This serves as irrefutable proof of the nature of the jizya, as we have previously explained, dispelling all the malicious distortions propagated by those with ulterior motives concerning this matter, especially regarding Islam's treatment of those who differ from it in faith, yet live under its protection and within the shade of its justice. As for those who remained outside the dominion of Islam, whether adherents of other religions or even those without any faith, Islam does not bear hostility toward them, nor does it cut ties with them, nor does it wage war against them unless they initiate aggression against Muslims or others. Its system allows for positive cooperation with them through treaties, which Islam upholds with the utmost respect. The Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, entered into numerous treaties, some of which had the disbelievers themselves as a party. He upheld these covenants with utmost fidelity, never permitting their violation unless the other party had breached them first. The Quranic injunctions on the sanctity of treaties are unequivocal. This is a matter of profound significance deserving of our careful reflection. The guiding principle of the Islamic constitution in international relations is encapsulated in the following divine decree. God does not forbid you to deal kindly and justly with those who have not fought against you on account of your faith, nor driven you from your homelands. Indeed, God loves those who act justly. But God forbids you to ally yourselves with those who have waged war against you because of your faith, and have driven you out of your homes, or have aided others in your expulsion. And those who ally themselves with them are indeed the wrongdoers. Quran 60:8-9. It is upon this foundation that the Islamic ethos engages with all of humanity. Islam inclines towards affection rather than enmity, even with those who have opposed it, so long as they refrain from aggression. This inclination springs from the innate human bond, seeking to preserve goodwill and strengthen the ties of kinship. Preceding the aforementioned verse, we find another divine pronouncement of great import. It may well be that God will bring about affection between you and those whom you now hold as enemies, and God is most powerful, and God is most forgiving, most merciful. Quran 60:7. As for the fulfillment of covenants, the scriptural injunctions on this matter are numerous. We cite but a few. And be true to your covenant with God whenever you bind yourselves by a pledge, and do not break your oaths after solemnly confirming them, for you have made God your witness. Indeed, God knows all that you do, and do not be like the woman who undoes her yarn after she has spun it firmly, making your oaths a means of deception among yourselves, merely because one community may be greater in number than another. Quran 16:91-92. Here Islam commands the strict observance of treaties and warns against treachery and deceit in agreements. It rejects the justification so often employed by unscrupulous politicians that the interests of the state warrant deception and betrayal. Islam does not recognize such reasoning as a valid excuse for breaking promises or violating covenants. Even when Muslims call upon their brethren for assistance in a struggle for faith, they are not permitted to breach a treaty previously entered into, so long as its terms remain inviolate from the side of the adversary. And if they seek your aid in matters of faith, it is your duty to help them, except against a people with whom you have a treaty. Quran 8:72. This represents the pinnacle of faithfulness in the fulfillment of agreements and integrity so lofty that words fall short of capturing its full grandeur. These were not mere theoretical ideals or utopian aspirations. Rather, they constituted the lived reality of Muslim conduct and their dealings on the international stage. The annals of history provide abundant evidence of this unwavering commitment. Among the many examples, we recount a few here. Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman once said, "I was prevented from witnessing the Battle of Badr because I set out with Abu al-Hussein only for the Quraysh to capture us. They said, 'You're heading to join Muhammad.' We replied, 'We seek only Medina and have no intention of joining him in battle.' They then made us swear by God that we would continue to Medina without engaging in combat. When we reached the Prophet and informed him of what had transpired, he said, 'Depart, for we shall honour our covenant with them and seek God's aid against them.' Likewise, Abu Rafi, a servant of the Prophet, recounted, 'The Quraysh sent me to negotiate with the Prophet, but when I beheld him my heart was filled with the light of Islam, and I said, O Messenger of God, I shall not return to them.' But he replied, 'I do not betray my covenants, nor do I detain messengers. However, return to them. If your heart remains as it is now, then come back.' And when Suhail ibn Amr was negotiating the Treaty of Hudaybiyah with the Prophet, just as the terms of the truce were being written, a man named Abu Jandal, Suhail's own son, arrived in chains, having escaped from the Quraysh. Upon seeing him, Suhail seized him by his garment and said, 'O Muhammad, the matter between us has been settled.' The Prophet responded, 'You speak the truth.' Abu Jandal then pleaded, 'O assembly of Muslims, will you return me to the idolaters so that they may persecute me for my faith?' But his cries availed him nothing, for the Prophet, in unwavering adherence to the agreed terms, returned him to the Quraysh, despite the treaty not yet being formally signed. Ultimately, the Islamic society is one that guarantees absolute justice to all its citizens, regardless of their creeds, races, colours, or places of origin. In this regard, it has reached a level of equity unparalleled by any civilization, past or present. This principle is not merely enshrined in Islamic scripture, but is borne out by historical reality. The Quran speaks of justice, declaring that it must be rendered to all people, and whenever you judge between people, judge with justice. Quran 4:58. It then addresses the inevitable complexities of human relationships, the influences of kinship and friendship, as well as the temptations of hostility and resentment, and calls for their exclusion from the realm of justice, lest they taint its purity. And whenever you speak, speak justly, even if it be against a near relative. Quran 6:152. And let not hatred towards a people lead you to act unjustly. Be just, for that is closer to God consciousness, and be mindful of God. Quran 5:8. Such is the absolute justice of Islam, unmoved by love or hate, unshaken by kinship or enmity. It is a justice that does not distinguish between individuals on the basis of lineage, wealth, or status, nor does it discriminate between nations, even in times of hostility. No international or domestic law has ever attained such a level of impartiality. Those who doubt this need only examine the justice of the powerful towards the weak in the realm of contemporary international relations, or the treatment of different races within societies such as the United States and apartheid-era South Africa. These are very real and undeniable issues of our age. The justice of Islam, however, was never a mere abstraction. It manifested itself in the lived reality of its adherents. A striking illustration of this justice is found in the case of Caliph Ali ibn Abi Talib. He once lost his coat of armour and later found it in the possession of a Christian man. He took the case to the judge, Shurai, and said, "This is my armour. I neither sold it nor gifted it." The judge turned to the Christian and asked, "What do you say to the claim of the commander of the faithful?" The man replied, "The armour is mine, though I do not consider the commander of the faithful a liar." Shuraiya then asked Ali, "Do you have proof?" Ali smiled and said, "Shuraiya has spoken the truth. I have no proof." Thus the judge ruled in favour of the Christian. But no sooner had the man taken a few steps than he turned back and declared, "By God, these are the judgments of the prophets." the commander of the faithful takes me to his own judge, who then rules against him. I bear witness that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is his servant and messenger. The armour is indeed yours, O commander of the faithful. I followed your army to Siffin, and it fell from your camel. Ali, moved by his sincerity, said, "Now that you have embraced Islam, the armour is yours." And it so happened that the son of Amr ibn al-As, the governor of Egypt, was once racing on horseback when a man from among the Copts of Egypt outpaced him. This wounded the pride of the Arab ruler's son, who could not bear to be bested by one of his subjects. In his arrogance, he struck the man with his whip, exclaiming, "Take this, for I am the son of the noble." But when the matter was brought before the commander of the faithful, Umar ibn al-Khattab, during the great gathering of Hajj, he handed his staff to the Egyptian and said to him, "Strike the son of the noble." And then, turning to Amr ibn al-Amr himself, for had it not been for his father's rank, the son would not have dared to act with such arrogance. Yet the Copt, content with having restored his own dignity, declined to do so. We have already cited from Sir T. W. Arnold's The Preaching of Islam that when the people of Homs closed their gates against the army of Heraclius, they declared to the Muslims, "Your rule and your justice are dearer to us than the tyranny and oppression of the Byzantines." Indeed, the examples of Islamic justice were not isolated instances, occurring sporadically as they might in any society. Rather, they were the manifestation of a profound and consistent principle, a fixed and unwavering path upheld in dealings with individuals, communities, and entire nations alike. This is what set the Islamic order apart, proving its precedence in the realm of universal justice, untainted by worldly considerations, and establishing its historical reality as a beacon of fairness for all. The universality of Islamic ideals. The Islamic vision of humanity is one of inherent unity, rejecting all forms of racial, ethnic or national prejudice. It regards all divine revelations as aspects of a singular truth and embraces cooperation with all faiths and communities, free from insularity or hostility. It confines the causes of conflict to the defence of religious freedom, the safeguarding of faith and worship, the protection of the oppressed, and the eradication of corruption from the earth. It categorically repudiates economic or ideological warfare, ensuring absolute social justice for all. These principles are what render the Islamic system inherently universal. They shape the Islamic society into one that transcends race and sectarianism, all while being firmly rooted in a divinely ordained creed, one that places immense emphasis on moral character, seeks to elevate the human spirit, and calls to virtue, nobility, and perfection. In this, the Islamic social order stands unique, unparalleled in the annals of human civilization, both ancient and modern. Islamic society is an open and free society, one in which any individual, any group, any nation may enter and integrate without need for permission, without condition or constraint, except that they must refrain from persecuting faith, suppressing religious expression, oppressing others, or spreading corruption upon the earth. There are no barriers of race, colour, language or geography. Not even religious identity serves as an impediment. Any person, without the intermediary of a priest or clergy, may simply declare, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger." And with that, he is a Muslim, entitled to all the rights of those whose ancestors have been in the faith for generations. Any Muslim, regardless of where he may be in the world, need not seek permission from any ruler or official to enter the lands of Islam, nor to travel within them. He may move freely without passport or checkpoint. Likewise, any non-Muslim may live within the Islamic realm, his faith and worship safeguarded, his life and property inviolate, his sustenance guaranteed whether he labours or is unable to do so, so long as he abides by the laws that govern the society, just as the Muslims of the land do. Any non-Muslim state may enter into treaties or agreements with the Islamic State for the sake of peace and mutual benefit, secure in the knowledge that its covenant will be honoured so long as it does not betray its terms, the isolation of other societies. Let us consider the Jewish community. It is a closed society, admitting only those of Israelite descent. Religion and ethnicity are one, rendering it intrinsically exclusive, incapable of ever becoming a truly universal society. Likewise, the Hindu society is almost as closed as the Jewish one. The rigid stratification imposed by Brahmanism has divided its people into castes, each isolated from the other by immutable barriers that cannot be crossed. Not only is Hinduism inaccessible to outsiders, but it also rejects the very notion of universal brotherhood that could pave the way for an open and inclusive society. No matter how influential India may become in global affairs, no matter how vast its population or wealth, it will remain socially isolated from the rest of humanity unless it abandons Brahmanism, which has entrenched its divisions in stone. As for the so-called Christian society, if such a term is even appropriate, it is not governed by Christianity. Its legal systems do not derive from its faith. Rather, they are rooted in secular laws, leaving religion isolated from the daily affairs of society. Christianity, in its essence, seeks only to influence the conscience of the individual. But the social order does not grant the individual the space to heed the voice of conscience, unless that order itself is built upon a creed that nourishes the soul. This detachment between faith and governance in what is termed the Christian world deprives both the individual and society of the moral inspiration that religion provides. And so, despite all its lofty calls for human compassion, Christianity's ideals have been rendered void, overpowered by the ruthless spirit of nationalism and colonial ambition. No matter what Marxist critiques may say about the ties between capitalism and imperialism, it remains evident that capitalism alone, without the driving force of nationalism, would not have been able to forge the colonial empires that history has witnessed. Islam and communism, the defining difference. As for the communist society, it shares with Islam the trait of being founded upon an idea rather than territorial boundaries or racial identity. Yet in its present form, communism remains a closed society, shielded by iron curtains, devoid of all human compassion, for it is steeped in class hatred and denies the spiritual dimension of human existence. Here lies the starkest contrast between the Islamic society and the communist one, the question of religious freedom. For the Islamic society, as we have seen, is an open and free society, where all creeds, sects and viewpoints may coexist. Compulsion has no place in its foundation or its survival. It does not rely on secret police or repression to sustain itself. It does not fear those who do not share its faith, nor does it oppress them, nor exile them from the land, nor bury them in the snows of Siberia, nor eliminate them in purges of political cleansing. Rather, it stands upon the conviction of faith, upon the voluntary commitment of each individual to uphold the moral and social order that is built upon that faith. That is why its gates remain open, free of barriers or restrictions, to all Muslims, regardless of race, colour or homeland, and even to non-Muslims, so long as they come in peace. Indeed, even the idolater has the right to seek refuge within the lands of Islam, and when he does, it becomes the duty of the Islamic State to grant him protection, to safeguard his life, and to ensure his safe passage. And if any among the idolaters seeks your protection, then grant it to him so that he may hear the word of God, then escort him to a place of safety. Quran 9:6. For any universal call to succeed, it must arise from a free and open world society, one that grants security and dignity even to those who differ in belief and opinion. For never shall all of humankind adopt a single creed, even if that creed were divinely revealed, free from the distortions of human fabrication. The exclusion of those who dissent from communism, depriving them of their right to exist within a communist society, strips it of the very essence of universality, a realm where all faiths, doctrines, races and colours coexist in harmony. Thus, it appears that the Islamic society alone is the true universal society, the only order worthy of a free world. It alone stands as the successful precedent for a world united, one in which humanity may find peace, security and stability. A divine order. The most distinctive feature that sets the Islamic social order apart from all other systems past and present is that it is divinely ordained, whereas all others are man-made constructs. From this single defining characteristic springs every other trait that shapes the nature of this system. We have already alluded to this when discussing the nature of the Islamic society. Now, let us expound upon it in greater detail. Man-made social systems are the product of human society itself, whether through the formulation of philosophical doctrines, devised by individuals and later embraced by entire communities, shaping their way of life and being implemented in practice, as was the case with dialectical materialism, upon which Marxism was built, and the social order now governing Russia and its satellites, or through gradual historical transformations, wherein the practical realities of communal life push society toward new social, economic and political structures, such as the transition in Europe from feudalism to capitalism, under the pressure of evolving social conditions. Often these historical transformations interact with theoretical philosophies they influence and are influenced by them, until society progresses from one system to another. Yet in all cases, man-made social systems are the creation of society itself, regardless of the specific process by which they emerge. The divine origin of the Islamic society, but the Islamic society did not follow this path. It did not emerge as the result of human philosophy or historical necessity. Rather, it came into being as the manifestation of a divine system founded upon Islamic faith and sustained by a divinely ordained law derived from that faith. The entire fabric of Islamic society, with all its defining characteristics and foundations, sprang forth from this faith and this law, a law in which human beings had no role except to receive it, to conform to it, and to grow within its framework. Thus, the Islamic society is the product of divine revelation, and in this fundamental sense it is a divine system. God, exalted be He, declares in His noble book, "You are the best community that has been brought forth for mankind." Quran 3, 110. The phrase "has been brought forth," Kirjit, clearly indicates the true nature of this nation's emergence and the nature of the system upon which it was established. This is a nation that was brought into existence not by its own intellectual concepts or necessity-driven evolution, but in accordance with a preordained model, decreed by its creator. It was brought forth for humanity, shaped by a divine order. The consequences of a divine system. Before we turn to the detailed implications of this fundamental characteristic in the Islamic social order, we must reaffirm a vital principle that follows from it. The Islamic social system, having originated from Islamic faith and having shaped its existence through Islamic law, must always remain subject to the very source from which it sprang. Its growth and renewal must always be governed by the divine law that shaped its existence. Islamic law must remain the guiding authority over every aspect of change within the Islamic social order. This system must not yield, whether in its principles or its details, to external influences that press upon it from beyond, for it is inherently self-sufficient, fully capable of meeting all evolving needs within its own framework and direction. It carries within itself the means to address every necessity and the method to assess every pressing reality. It does not leave the evaluation of needs to human whims, but instead provides clear guidance on some matters explicitly and establishes principles of analogy for others, ensuring that the assessment of needs and necessities remains governed by its own intrinsic law. This system is precise in its composition, complete in its structure. Every detail and principle within it is harmoniously interwoven, bound together by a single unifying foundation. It is so meticulously balanced that even the slightest foreign element introduced into its fabric would alter its very nature. The indivisibility of the Islamic system. This is not a system that can be patched together. It is not a system that can borrow spare parts from any man-made ideology, for in Islam, belief and worship, conduct and transactions all are interlinked. They are inseparable, interwoven, and mutually reinforcing. They all stem from a single faith, directed toward clearly defined objectives, producing their own unique social effects. Thus, introducing alien social influences derived from foreign philosophies or systems, even if they appear unrelated to faith, such as economic and financial matters, would be incompatible. As we shall soon see, every aspect of this system, no matter how distant it may seem from faith, is deeply connected to it and profoundly shaped by it. The role of human experience in an Islamic framework. Yet Islam does not prohibit benefiting from human experience so long as it does not contradict any foundational principle of divine law. There is no restriction on drawing from human knowledge to assess evolving social needs and regulate them through modern research methodologies. There is no restriction on utilizing human advancements to implement Islamic principles effectively. Islamic principles are immutable, they do not change. But the means of realizing these principles are ever-renewing. Thus, Islam embraces human experience provided that in identifying social needs or in devising methods to fulfill them, it does not violate any fixed Islamic principle or contradict any of its eternal directives. Illustrations of this principle. To clarify this point, let us present a few preliminary examples, even before their detailed discussion in later sections. Islam establishes absolute justice as an essential foundation of life within the Islamic society. This justice extends to all aspects of life, owe equality among all human beings in origin, race, rights and duties. Owe fair access to opportunities for growth, learning, labour and excellence, unhindered by barriers of race, colour, class, lineage or wealth. Owe justice in governance and judiciary, uninfluenced by personal favour or animosity, free from the sway of any external force, even religious differences. These are fundamental principles. However, the methods of implementing them were not rigidly prescribed. Islamic jurisprudence, in its early days, outlined certain mechanisms suitable for that era. Yet these mechanisms can evolve according to the needs of each society and time. For example, in the administration of justice, should there be a single court or multiple levels of courts? Should judges be generalists, or should they specialize? Should judicial authority be separate from executive and legislative powers, or should some courts possess legislative or executive functions? These matters are left to human discretion to be shaped by evolving experiences and changing circumstances. Islam, for instance, establishes consultation, shura, as one of the fundamental principles of governance in the Islamic State. However, the precise manner in which consultation is to be realized in its most perfect form has not been explicitly prescribed. Within the Islamic society, both in the time of the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and in the period following him, various forms of consultation were practiced in matters of governance and other affairs. Yet, what transpired in those times does not constitute an exhaustive definition of all possible means of consultation. Rather, the specific mechanisms of consultation are left open to the evolving circumstances of the Islamic society, to its changing conditions, and to the innovative methods that may emerge through human experience and continual experimentation. Should consultation be conducted through general voting in all matters or only in some? Should it be exercised by a council of scholars and statesmen, those who are widely acknowledged as representatives of the Ummah? Should it be carried out through elected representatives of professional guilds, academic institutions, and various societal groups? Should voting be conducted verbally or in writing? Should ministers be accountable to a supreme elected authority, or should they be responsible before a representative body of the people? Should governance be conducted through a single council, or should there be two chambers? All of these questions are left to the circumstances of each nation, its time and its place, as well as to the cumulative wisdom of human experience that seeks to realize consultation in its most effective form. Thus, there are many such issues for which no specific textual injunction exists regarding the precise method of implementation matters that reflect the inherent flexibility of the Islamic system, which, while remaining governed by divine law, allows for adaptation in its structure and application. We now return to a consideration of some of the profound effects that this great characteristic, the characteristic of flexibility, has had upon the structure of the Islamic society. We have stated that this system, owing to its emergence from the Islamic creed and its formation in accordance with the divine law derived from that creed, remains intimately bound to it. In reality, the impact of the Islamic creed is manifest in every aspect of the Islamic system, whether in those aspects that appear closely connected to faith, such as acts of worship and moral values, or in those that seem, at first glance, more distant, such as financial transactions, economic interrelations, and political affairs, both domestic and international. Indeed, it is difficult to comprehend the true nature of any of these multifaceted aspects without studying the Islamic creed, without understanding Islam's vision of the universe, life and humanity, and without linking this overarching worldview to every sphere of life in Islam, whether personal, familial, social or political. The doctrine of divine oneness, Tawheed, in all its radiance dominates and permeates the fundamental elements of the Islamic social order, the absolute oneness of God without any trace of association or plurality, the oneness of God's will in creation, preservation, governance and judgment, the oneness of existence itself, as it unfolds under the direction of this singular divine will, the oneness of life in its source, its essence and its fundamental principles, the oneness of humanity in its origin, its generations, its aspirations, and its ultimate destiny. The oneness of divine guidance as transmitted through a single brotherhood of messengers forming one united community. The oneness of the believing Ummah, which encompasses all who have believed in any of God's messengers before the coming of the next, from Adam to the seal of the prophets. The oneness of human nature in its recognition and orientation, the oneness of creed, action, worship and conduct, and the oneness of this world and the hereafter, both directed toward God. This doctrine of divine oneness in all its luminous dimensions exercises complete dominion over every facet of the Islamic social order. It defines its principles and distinguishing features, and it elucidates the emotions, ethics, relationships, rights and responsibilities that characterize this system in all its various forms. The truth of this assertion will become increasingly evident as we proceed in our study of the distinctive qualities and foundational principles of the Islamic society. In our exploration of the underlying spiritual and legal frameworks that give form to these characteristics, we shall witness how the doctrine of divine oneness serves as the foundation for the Islamic system's defining quality, its divine orientation, Rabbaniyah. While the doctrine of divine oneness is the cornerstone of all revealed religions, its meaning in Islam is broader and more comprehensive than in any other creed. All monotheistic faiths agree upon the oneness of God, but Islam extends this oneness to its natural consequences, the oneness of God's creation, and the oneness of the activity of his creation. This truth becomes evident when one compares Islam to Judaism, for instance. Both affirm the oneness of God, yet Islam advances beyond this point by incorporating all the dimensions of divine oneness that we have mentioned. Judaism, however, remains confined within the narrow bounds of ethnic nationalism, limiting its message to the children of Israel alone without extending it to the whole of humankind. Go, both of you, to Pharaoh and say, "We are messengers from your sustainer. Let the children of Israel go with us and do not oppress them. We have brought you a sign from your sustainer, and peace shall be upon him who follows the right guidance." Quran 20:47. And Moses said, "O Pharaoh, I am a messenger from the sustainer of all worlds, bound to say nothing about God except the truth. I have come to you with clear evidence from your sustainer, so let the children of Israel go with me." Quran 7, 104, 105. Each of these perspectives naturally gives rise to corresponding effects within the system based upon its principles, its legislation, and its practical applications. Let us leave aside for now the Jewish claim of being the chosen people and their assertion recorded in the Quran. They say, "We are not bound in our dealings with the unlettered Gentiles." Quran 3:75. And let us not dwell upon the consequences of these deviations for their relations with other nations and their approach to life itself. This truth likewise becomes apparent when one compares Islam to Christianity. Both affirm the oneness of God, disregarding, for the moment, the distortions introduced later by the pagan Romans when they merged their polytheism with Christian monotheism, leading to the development of numerous myths and doctrines. Yet, whereas Islam extends the concept of divine oneness to all aspects of life, Christianity remains confined to the ethnic boundaries of the children of Israel. And God made him a messenger to the children of Israel. "I have come to you with a sign from your sustainer." Quran 349. Even if we set aside this ethnic particularism and consider Christianity's historical development, its transformation into a universal call, contrary to its original nature and purpose, which was intended for the children of Israel alone, and for a limited period until the arrival of the next revelation, this transformation was not due to its intrinsic message, but rather to external political factors, particularly when the Roman Empire adopted Christianity by force, imposing it upon its subjects through coercion and the sword. Beyond this ethnic limitation, however, another fundamental difference emerges between Islam's comprehensive concept of divine oneness and Christianity's narrower interpretation, namely in their views on human nature. Christianity separates the body from the soul, inclining toward the suppression of physical desires in favor of spiritual aspirations, which ultimately led to the institution of monasticism, though it was never divinely ordained, but was rather an invention of later generations in their quest for God's pleasure. Islam, by contrast, unifies all dimensions of human existence. It considers every human endeavor, whether in worship, labor, or the enjoyment of life's lawful pleasures, to be an act of devotion, so long as it is undertaken with a conscious orientation toward God. Thus, Islam alone presents a vision of divine unity that is not merely theological, but existential, encompassing all aspects of life and binding together the realms of spirit and matter, faith and action, this world and the hereafter, in a single harmonious whole. And now, after this clarification, let us return to tracing some of the effects of the Islamic doctrine of divine oneness in realizing the unique characteristic of God-centeredness within the Islamic system. The first of these effects is the unification of direction, the singular orientation towards which individuals and communities, rulers and subjects, laborers and employers, producers and consumers, givers and receivers all turn. A unification of direction that encompasses their practical endeavors and material production as much as it encompasses their emotions and spiritual inclinations, both equally oriented towards a single purpose, the worship of God in pursuit of his pleasure. And I have not created the jinn and humankind, but to worship me. Quran 51:56. Say, verily my prayer, my sacrifice, my living and my dying are for God, the sustainer of the worlds. He has no partner. Thus have I been commanded, and I am the first of those who submit. Quran 6:162, 163. And it is related that a man once came to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and asked, a man may fight for the spoils of war, another may fight for fame, and a third may fight to be seen, who among them is truly in the path of God. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, replied, whoever fights so that the word of God may be supreme, he is in the path of God. Let us pause for a moment to reflect on the first of these sacred texts, for its elucidation has profound implications in clarifying an essential aspect of Islam's comprehensive vision of life. What, then, is the meaning of worship as intended in the verse, and I have not created the jinn and humankind, but to worship me? It appears to me with clarity that the intent is to delineate the supreme purpose of existence to direct all activities towards God, whether those activities take the form of ritual devotion, intention, or any action of any kind. In other words, to orient one's entire being towards a purpose higher than earthly concerns, broader than immediate human needs. This orientation of all endeavors towards God serves to purify life, elevate it, and endow it with a meaning loftier than the mere fulfillment of bodily desires and material necessities, whether near or distant. The objective, therefore, is not to confine life entirely within the framework of ritual acts of worship. Rather, Islam elevates every action that is sincerely directed towards God into an act of worship. Even the enjoyment of life's lawful pleasures, when undertaken with the intention of fulfilling God's will in permitting them, becomes a form of worship. And from this perspective emerges the unification of human energy, its entire force being directed towards God. This unity of direction, this common orientation of individuals and communities within the Islamic society in all affairs, coupled with the awareness of God in every word and deed, leaves its imprint upon the very nature of such a society and the bonds that form between its members. For these bonds do not arise merely from personal or collective interests as perceived by individuals left to their own subjective calculations. Rather, faith in God shapes their understanding of what constitutes true benefit. Their conception of welfare is thus drawn from the framework outlined by divine law, shaping the nature of their relationships accordingly. In this way, economic factors do not stand alone in determining social interactions. Rather, these factors themselves are molded in accordance with what God's law has ordained for Islamic society, guided by the spiritual radiance of faith and its influence upon all human relations. In Islam, faith is inextricably linked to the systems and laws that govern society, and every individual, whether ruler or ruled, is required to safeguard and uphold them. Let us illustrate this with some examples. Zakat, the financial obligation, fulfills a dimension of social solidarity in Islam, a concept far broader than zakat itself, and more encompassing than financial rights alone, as we shall see. Yet this zakat is not merely an economic duty. It is a religious obligation constituting one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It is sought from those who possess wealth in the name of God, and it is intimately tied to faith in Him and the recognition that He alone has entrusted them with their wealth. Thus they are obliged to spend from it as He commands, and spend of that whereof He has made you trustees, Quran 57:7, and give them from the wealth of God which He has granted you, Quran 24:33. Riba, usury, an element of financial and economic systems, is prohibited, and its prohibition is rooted in faith and the spiritual consciousness that informs Islamic economic principles. O you who believe, fear God and give up what remains due to you of interest if you are indeed believers, but if you do it not, then be warned of war from God and His messenger, and if you repent, then you shall have your capital sums. Deal not unjustly, nor shall you be dealt with unjustly. Quran 2:278, 279. The punishment for theft, a matter touching upon both ethical and economic concerns, is likewise tied to faith, for it is executed as a divine decree, not as a retribution from the victims or from society as a whole. As to the thief, male or female, cut off their hands, a punishment by way of an example from God for what they have earned. Quran 5:38. The punishment for adultery, which bears upon morality, family structure, and even economic concerns such as the confusion of lineage and inheritance, is similarly linked to faith. It is not framed as a matter of personal or collective rights, but as a right belonging to God. The adulteress and the adulterer, flog each of them with 100 lashes, and let not compassion withhold you from carrying out this law of God, if you truly believe in God and the last day. Quran 24:2. And so, as we examine the foundational principles upon which the Islamic social order rests, we find them all inextricably connected to faith, established upon it, and deriving their authority and legitimacy from it, thus manifesting the divine principle that undergirds the Islamic system. Another dimension of this divine orientation within the Islamic system, one which we shall soon explore in greater detail, relates to the governance of society. In this unique, God-centered system, sovereignty belongs to God alone. There is no absolute authority vested in any ruler or subject. Rather, God alone is the ultimate legislator. The role of human beings is merely to apply and implement the divine legislation. Even in matters where no explicit ruling is found in the sacred texts, they are still bound to the overarching principles of Islam. They are not originators of new laws, nor innovators of principles without precedent in divine revelation, let alone principles that contradict its foundational tenets. In the realm of governance, they are governed by the divine injunction, and judge between them by what God has revealed, and follow not their vain desires, but beware lest they divert you from any part of what God has revealed to you. Quran 5:49. And whoever does not judge by what God has revealed, they are indeed disbelievers. Quran 5:44. And it is not for a believing man or a believing woman, when God and His messenger have decreed a matter, to have any choice in their affair. Quran 33:36. And the reference to the messenger, may peace and blessings be upon him, in the context of governance and legislation, does not negate the sovereignty of God alone over all matters beyond the domain of human authority. For indeed the messenger, may peace and blessings be upon him, does not speak out of his own inclination. It is nothing but a revelation sent down. Quran 53:4. As for those matters in which the messenger, may peace and blessings be upon him, consulted his companions and acted upon their counsel, rather than his own judgment, they pertained solely to affairs that bore no relation to divine legislation in any of its forms. These were matters concerning the practical organization of the community issues that fell within the realm of empirical knowledge, such as the pollination of palm trees, the selection of battle sites, and strategies related to military tactics, all of which belong to the domain of experience rather than divine ordinance or social regulation grounded in fundamental principles. It is within this sphere that the messenger, may peace and blessings be upon him, declared, "You are more knowledgeable about the affairs of your world." This statement, however, does not extend to fundamental principles and doctrines concerning human belief or the structure of society. Let this distinction be made with utmost clarity, for there are those who, in their obfuscation, seek to confound the matter and lead people astray with specious arguments. Indeed, the jurists of Islamic law, who are not an exclusive caste akin to the clergy of the Christian Church, but rather any who have acquired deep understanding of religion, regardless of their occupation or role, possess the right to differ in their interpretation of the sacred texts and in their derivation of legal rulings, just as interpreters of man-made laws may differ in their exegesis. Yet the divergence of Islamic jurists remains confined within well-defined boundaries. It cannot transgress the fundamental principles of the Sharia, and if you dispute over anything, refer it back to God and his messenger. Quran 4:59. Thus the sovereignty of God alone is upheld, and the Islamic society remains governed by his divine law. Should it deviate from this foundation, it would cease to be an Islamic society worthy of that distinctive appellation. Thus we find that the hallmark of divine governance is realized through the singular sovereignty of God, a sovereignty that in turn stems from the very essence of Islamic monotheism. Through this divine governance, the Islamic system stands apart from all other systems known to mankind, including the so-called theocratic order, in which rulers derive their authority either from a priestly class or from a claim to divine right, portraying themselves as the shadow of God upon the earth. In Islam, however, the concept of divine governance pertains to the system itself, not to the ruler or the ruling authority. A leader within the Islamic framework does not derive his legitimacy from religious clerics, nor does he claim it as a divine prerogative. Rather, his mandate to govern is conferred upon him by the free pledge of allegiance from the people. Likewise, his right to obedience is conditional upon his adherence to the divine law and nothing else. Listen and obey, even if a black slave is appointed over you, as long as he upholds the book of God among you. How vast is the gulf between this principle and the theocratic order as it was known in Europe? For in Islam, divine governance is not the sacrosanct privilege of rulers and princes, but rather the sovereignty of divine law and divine order. And when God legislates for humankind, he does so with perfect knowledge and absolute justice, for he alone knows best his creation, and he is the most subtle, the all-aware.